let's see. Doug, you're from Clear Lake. Well, anybody else from Clear Lake here? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, of course, Jerry. Thanks very much for the site. This is fantastic. Nice and roomy. So I'm Adam Sutkus. I'm with a group called the Center for Collaborative Policy at Sac State University. This is our, I guess you'd call it a restart. This is a meeting we're going to talk a lot about today in terms of structure. We have some new people in the room who haven't been involved with us before, but this is the Clear Lake Stakeholders Discussion Forum on water issues, and we'll go into some detail as to what that is. As it happens to be, this is my last meeting of this group. I've been, you'll learn in a moment, some of the history. I've been involved with many of the folks in the room over the course of many months, working on some issues that led to this meeting, this format. But my tenure ends really now, after this meeting, the end of June formally. We're going to be talking about the transition of this process as we go forward. So, but to get things started, we actually don't have quite as many as I thought we had today, so maybe we'll get some more. But I think since we don't have that many, I think we can go around and do individual introductions. So why don't we just do name and organization, if you have one. Otherwise, just name would be great. Want to start over here? Great.
Mark Dillinger, Special Districts.
Can you hear okay over here? Yeah. The air just kicked on.
Doug Heron, Public Works, City Planning.
Jen Carpenter, Special District. Holly Grover, Central Valley Water Board.
Okay.
Kristen Honeycutt, DWR, and prospective note taker.
That's right. Thank you, Kristen.
Paul Lynn, DWR.
Scott DeLeon, Lake County.
In the back.
J.W. Birch IV, Record B.
Okay. So we have media in the room. I just want to make sure. Okay, great. Thanks. And then in the back.
Maurice Taylor, Public.
Okay, great. Okay.
Joe Cross, I write, freelance writer.
Okay. Thank you.
And Steve Johnson, resident community.
Great.
Frank Ariaza, Bureau of Land Management.
Great.
Molly Nelson, Bureau of Land Management.
Great.
Andrew Britton, City of Lakeport.
Welcome.
Jerry Spittler, City of Clear Lake Council member.
Welcome.
Chris Farm. Lolita Adrian, member of the public.
Okay.
Mike Dunlap.
Thanks.
Linda Armstrong.
Great. Well, welcome everybody. So there are several materials that were at the front if everybody got them, and let me quickly review what we have here. An agenda for today, a ground rule sheet which I'll go over in a second, as well as some notes of the last what was called the governance work group meeting, which we'll talk about that in just a minute, as well as a document that's titled Charter and Operating Rules for General Organization with a version date on it. We'll be talking about that today as well for this discussion forum, as well as there was a large document which we're going to be spending some time on, and that is the ongoing, what we're calling, for want of a better term, a work planning document that has been generated and discussed by the what was called the governance work group for the previous working group coming together on various ideas and projects and priorities, potentially to air and to discuss and move forward on with regards to areas and priorities for Clear Lake. So did everybody get copies of all of this? Yeah? Okay. Great. So I'm going to review the agenda for a minute and the ground rules for today's meeting. Those of you who were involved with the previous iteration of the governance work group have seen much of this before, but this is good standard rules of how to proceed. So today I'm going to go over in a minute some ground rules and talk about finalizing the agenda for today. And what you'll hear me talk a lot about, I'm modeling a new format that is anticipated to be the general format with amendments. I'm sure it will change and be fluid, but generally which will be coming forward on a quarterly basis from here on out. At least that's the hope. We'll be talking about that as well. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on this stakeholders discussion forum, how we came to be today, and also recognize the good work that some folks have done with this governance group that has been doing this work since the fall. And then we're going to have what I'm calling, and we can change the name, but calling it open microphone for any topics, any thoughts, any ideas on any particular issue. Specifically, those things that are not agendized today that we're going to go through, and I'll talk specifically what is on our agenda today, and I want to hear from you what we should talk today as an agenda item. But we do want to allow just anybody to talk about their particular interests, issues, concerns, goals for today, or anything else. We want to be able to have enough time at the beginning of each of these meetings, as well as at the end of these meetings, to make sure any topic that is on somebody's mind, because this is a meeting of the public as well as a meeting of some key sectors and groups around the region to come together. That's what this is for. So we want to be able to touch on those particular issues, and whether or not they're talked about today, that's okay. Maybe they'll be agendized in the future, but at least we can get them out in the open, get them in the notes, and be able to have them on our list for the future. And then we'll talk, we have a block of time to talk before our break on just the ideas, the issues that we've agendized. And I'll cut to the chase on one thing. A big agenda for us today is, of course, that big sheet, is to continue the discussions that have been very effective, very rich at the governance work group, is to talk about the particular projects, issues, and potential priorities and ways forward on key projects and initiatives for the Lake region, using that large sheet, the work plan, as a starting point based on some criteria that we'll talk about. We've had very good discussions the last 2 meetings on that. We're continuing to refine it, and we'll talk more about that. But any other agendas that items that we add to it, we will either try to put in before the break or after the break, because we'll have a second round of time to talk about various issues that we agendize. Again, continuing expected is a lot of discussion on the main sheet that we have, our work planning sheet, and then move forward on anything else that we have time for. And then we have a snapshot of time near the end of the meeting to reflect on our discussion today, as well as to set the stage for the next meeting. Again, another open mic period on anything you may want to talk about, any particular issues that would pertain to important topics, either now or for the future, issues to bring up. And then we want to set the stage for the next meeting. I will be, since this is and again, full disclosure, this is my last meeting with this group, with this transition. And we'll talk more about this. That last agenda item, Scott DeLeon is going to manage, and taking over in that convening role for the next quarterly meeting, which we can talk about. And so we'll bring Scott up at that point. So that's our general agenda for now, and we'll come back around and talk about some agendized issues, things to talk about at today's meeting in addition to our large work plan in just a second. But I did want to talk about traditional ground rules. This is in your packet that came at the front of at the beginning of the meeting, and this is something that those who are involved in previous meetings that I facilitated are quite familiar with. But I think it's very important to be able to make sure that everybody has a chance to speak, but we manage it with regards to basic rules of process, so everybody has a chance to bring up their ideas in a safe environment, but yet still have the chance to say it honestly and openly. So I'm going to be asking for everybody's agreement in the room on these ground rules. Those that are in your packet are essentially be created up here. So very quickly, use conversational courtesy on anything we talk about, as if you're talking to a family member across the table. Maybe that's a bad example, but conversational courtesy. And then humor is always welcome and important, but just please not at the expense of anybody else with regards to bringing up particular points. And in this forum, this is a public meeting. This is a hybrid meeting in that it's partly a work group to continue some heavy lifting, roll up the sleeves work on potential projects, but at the same time, we are inviting and want to have the public involved to hear about these issues, talk about these issues, bring up their ideas, so continue this ability to expand conversation, expand dialogue, expand input into what's important for lake-related issues for the region. So everything here is all ideas have value. Maybe you don't know about some history of a particular item that has been discussed about at a previous meeting. That's okay. We may take that offline to have some discussion later on with someone else who's here today at another time. If there is a lot of history, we don't want to slow the group down too much, but then again, it's fair game that if you have a question, you need to be able to bring it up or to bring up a point of view. All ideas do have value. If something is really important to you, please don't leave it unsaid, bring it up, and then we can talk about it again in the context of successful and respectful dialogue. And then with regards to editorials, we want to hear your thoughts. Please don't put the thoughts in the minds of someone else or put words to what you think are their thoughts. We want to hear what you have to say. And I think that's very important as we proceed to make sure that everybody has an idea to say what they think, but not to put meaning into someone else's thoughts on their behalf and let them speak for themselves. And as always, if for some reason, which I don't expect it'll happen, these have been very good, but if the tone of the meeting somehow gets inappropriate, we'll take a break. And if that continues or that's retained, then we'll have to stop the meeting, but I don't expect that to happen. But that's something we want to make sure everybody knows it's a safe place. And do be comfortable. Please put your phones to silent. The bathrooms are right out here around behind me in this hallway. Please feel free to jump up and go to the bathroom. We've got some cookies and waters in the back. We will be taking a break as well partway through, so we have a lot planned for the afternoon, but feel free to get up and move on. So I'd like to go around the room and make sure that everybody's okay with that, the ground rules, that everybody accepts them, and that way we can move forward and everybody is comfortable with those. So I'd like to just at this table, everything, some nods are good, great. Kristen in the back table, yes, okay, thumbs up, yes, thank you. Maurice, you good? Okay, this table, great. This table over here? Okay, great, great. I mean, if I don't hear anything now, I'll take that as negative affirmation that everything is okay, all right? And then you agree with the ground. Okay? So for today, the way this new structure is, and I'll be talking about the charter in just a second, I'll walk you through it in great detail. That will only be for today. We don't expect to have that agenda item in future meetings. That's for today because it's the first, this is the inaugural meeting, if you want to put it that way, of this new format, so we'll talk about that. But we will have, it's my recommendation that this charter be ultimately very openly distributed, whether it's on the website, through the county, or other means, and available at each of these meetings, so it's there as a reference point. So with regards to agenda items, one of the things that you'll see in a moment in the charter is that we want to be able to allow key agenda items to be brought forward either before the meeting, so they can be agendized on a quarterly basis, or more often if you want to be more often, or in the moment here on the day of. So I did mention earlier a big topic today. One of the bulk of our time is probably going to be spent on the big work planning document, where we're going to be talking about specifically projects and issues and initiatives. But this is a good time to bring forward. Is there anything else that we want to talk about today, if we have time on the agenda, or a future agenda item, agendize it for another meeting? Anything else that anybody in the room would like to bring up? Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Well, I had sent you an email yesterday. My question about what is a governance work group. We had meetings prior to this event today in which the meeting is called a governance work group formation meeting. Now, I found that familiar at the level of the Bay Delta CalFed programs. They have a governance work group that's comprised of agencies and organizations and so forth, that it's a formal process by which they develop the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, for example. At our last meeting, you announced that we were no longer going to that. That wasn't our direction, and so we have a new charter. Could you please tell me two things? How did you make the decision that you made that said that we're not looking for a governance worker anymore, we're going to have a discussion forum? And what were the issues that were the criteria for making that choice? I'm just curious.
Okay, well, let me go around the group and see if there's anything else that anybody else wants to bring up with regards to agenda items for today. Yes, ma'am.
I would like to present some things that have been published but not widely publicized. I'd like to read articles with each person here. And I'd like to talk about networking at the state level and the local level.
Can you help me capture these? My hands aren't free, so if you can help me. So it was, can you restate that again? So you want to talk about the
networking.
Networking at the state level, how to network at the state level?
Yeah, and locally. I have some information from one state agency that could be shared with another state agency when they're two independent agencies.
Okay, so it's communicating and networking at the state level?
Yeah.
From this area, from this
region?
region?
And I'd like to share how it came about, how that came about. I have some published articles here.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
About 5 minutes maybe.
Okay, great, thanks. And we have several folks in the room that are from the state, so we might be able to have some good input. Other thoughts on other topics for today or a future meeting?
Sure, the Watershed Protection District.
Okay? You good? Okay, great. So, hang on one second. So I think I'm going to answer your question, Betsy, with regards to governance work group transition issues that you just brought up in this discussion in terms of an orientation of how we got here today. And again, this is an agenda item which is not really expected in future meetings. This is for this meeting. This is sort of the first one that we transitioned to governance group. So I came involved in the fall. For those of you who weren't part of the effort in the fall, I came involved in the fall. I came on as a contract to the State Department of Water Resources, who brought me in to assist with the region, with facilitation on issues pertaining to developing activities and support of the Integrated Regional Watershed Management Program. We did a lot of work from fall through spring on various elements of projects and process, content and process. A lot of the content work is contained within your large document that's in front of you here. Process-wise, what I think you're referring to, Betsy, is we did have a charter that was identified, which, as Betsy had articulated, called the Governance Work Group. And it was articulated that way, it was titled that way, which was my title. It was to work on how to move forward with lake issues in the region, how to come together, work across different sectors, different interests. And in the charter in a minute, which I'll talk about, we'll talk more about those sectors, but basically there were essentially 4 sectors that were originally around the table for several months, which were tribes, business and industry, government, which was the full list of city, county, regional, state, and also fed, as well as residents, community interest folks. So we had that involved, and we were working on various issues from the gamut, from what has been impediments for being able to move forward, perhaps over the course of time, to what were the key issues that we needed to work on together in the region to be able to move forward, and what was the right way to be able to achieve that. So what Betsy is referring to is that in the original governance working group, there was a description that I had written as a draft, which involved a more precise identification of individual sectors that would have different types of, I guess the best way to describe it is, I call it a sector was a coalition of interest to come together to work on various issues. We went down that road for quite a while to define that process and that charter to move forward with that particular structure. In my efforts and working with everybody who was involved with the effort, determined that the best way forward, because there were some remaining concerns in some areas where we couldn't reach agreement on some process-related elements with regards to that particular charter. This charter that I'll go over in just a moment in front of you was my recommendation to all of you and to the county, who will then be taking this forward from here on out as the best way to be able to accomplish several things. One, continue the discussions, the very good discussions that that group was doing with regards to content, which is on the document that we'll talk about in a few minutes with regards to that large piece that has projects and initiatives in it, as well as process, of which one of the biggest issues that came out during those process discussions was the need to involve the public, was the need to involve other individuals around the region to be able to come involved with this process and be involved. So that's how we came to today, that's how we came to this charter, which I'll walk through in just a moment. And this process now that we're heading into with this kickoff meeting, the expectation is and the hope is that this group will be able to be a regular meeting of an ability to have all these different interests, the public come together, talk about issues, work on even potential coordination, collaboration on moving forward on particular projects like that worksheet we're talking about, but also to air concerns, issues, thoughts, or timely items that need to come up to allow the public, to allow other interests around the table to be able to have a voice and be able to keep that in a much more open type of format. So that's how we got to this point today. That's how the goals are articulated to you today. This, of course, is a evolutionary process. If there are ways to change it, ways to make it work better, the ways to be more effective, to be able to get more word out, to be able to have more effective dialogue from the public, be more effective, be able to work on issues together. Let's hear it. This is a great way to be able to do it. That's what this is for, ultimately. So does that help in terms of some history and goals before I jump into the charter specifically, which hopefully will be indeed long-term or at least medium-term operating rules for this group to be able to go on a quarterly basis. And it can be what you want it to be. This is something that's self-governed, which we'll talk about in a moment. If there are subcommittees or issues that decide to come out of this to be able to work together on particular items or projects, fantastic. And then it can come back around on a quarterly basis and meet with this group and talk about findings and issues that have come up. So any other quick comments now before I dive into the charter? Yes, ma'am.
Well, if it's not a GWG, what is it called? Stakeholders?
Stakeholder discussion forum. Exactly right. Okay, I'm going to turn to the charter for a second. It was in your packet for a couple minutes. And this is, again, something I'm spending some extra time on for this particular meeting, but won't do it in the expectation this isn't going to be the case for future meetings. But I'm going to spend a little bit of time going through this because I think it's important to set the process in place. So for future quarters and future efforts of this work group, everybody kind of understands exactly the best way to work together. If there's any particular issues or problems with this, we need to bring it out and talk about it. But again, this is as my handing off to those of you in the room, county as the convener. This is my recommendations to all of you to be able to move forward and be able to have a forum to be able to talk about these issues in the future. So starting at the top, it talks about the purpose of this particular working group, which is to allow these different interests across these different sectors to come together, and I'm paraphrasing, to convene and share information, discuss input, and engage in proactive dialogue, to coordinate and collaborate on these issues as much as possible, share ideas, share initiatives, and work forward and have a forum to be able to bring these issues out one-on-one across different sectors, both government, resident, tribal, business, etc. But have a forum to do that on a regular basis so you can get together and talk. I've heard over the course of time for the previous iteration of this group was that there was a concern there wasn't enough dialogue. There wasn't enough of an ability to have sharing of information. So this is one of the reasons for this body is to accomplish just that, is to create a forum to be able to have everybody be able to come together and talk about these issues. There's some guiding principles listed underneath here, and I won't go over each one of them in great detail, but I do ask you to take a look at them as we go through it. It talks about the need for communication and collaboration to be able to achieve joint goals and have effective dialogue. Education is the key to understanding. Sometimes it takes some time to talk about a particular point of view and a particular perspective. And that's okay. When there's something challenging appears, that's when you have to work it through. We talked about issues being valid. We want to make this forum open to all interested parties, and it's voluntary. This body, it's important to know, doesn't hold statutory or regulatory authority, but it is, and that resides with ongoing respective agencies that are here or other bodies. But this is, however, indeed designed as a forum to allow for all these different issues, these interests to meet. And so if the city or state or county has a particular perspective or tribe or business, they can share those particular issues and discuss them and have a venue and a forum to be able to talk about these very issues. Participation in convener. And again, this was my recommendation to everybody in the room, and my recommendation in this case to the county for being able to convene and have this continue, is to be able to have, for consistency, that DWR, state or the county DWR, will do a lot of the heavy lifting to make sure the body keeps moving forward. And Scott, I just want to verify publicly that this is an effort that you're going to support, and it's going to be able to come forward, and we'll have, the goal is to have a quarterly meeting of this group and move forward with these different interests and do some of the things that in here, the things in here that are identified for you as DWR. These are things that you and your staff are going to endeavor to accomplish.
Yes.
Okay. So pre-meeting information, agenda items, are things that come forward. DWR is going to post these on their website, and Kristen did a very nice flyer. That was something we modeled for this meeting. Hopefully that will be able to indeed be continued on a regular basis. And other groups are encouraged to do, like I know Betsy, you did with your, you sent me some emails that you sent out to various of your networks. That's highly encouraged to continue to increase participation and interest in this work group as time goes on, to get other folks being able to participate in this forum. It is open to all interested groups and individuals. And those 4 groups that I mentioned earlier are mentioned here. Those were the genesis of what was called the governance work group before. They're highly encouraged to still continue with this process moving forward now. But it isn't just them, it's anybody who's interested who wants to participate on a regular basis on lake-related issues. Some process-related issues, notes, something that we've always found to be really important is consistency on notes, so things don't get lost. So it isn't just a forum that people talk and commitments or issues aren't completely lost. In this case, Kristen, thank you again for State DWR is doing notes for today's meeting. But this is something in future meetings, the group, and Scott, you and your group will need to call it out, whether it's someone from DWR or if it's someone else in the room who volunteers, highly encouraged there to be someone identified to take notes for every meeting of the work group for the future, so you can capture what was said, and there's some consistency and a reference point for any future dialogue, especially several meetings down the road. And additional documentation may be created, and the reason I put this in here is because of the very document you have in front of you right now, which is that work plan document, which was a lot of work's been put into that, a lot of good dialogue has already started refining it. We're going to talk more on that today, but that's a good example of something that indeed will be add-on documentation to anything that this group can work on together. So that's highly encouraged. So in terms of process, in terms of notification and communication, we talked about striving for quarterly meetings. The agendas will be notified, will be sent out in advance via website and through these other networks to get out the word. I put this tag in, although it's not required under the Brown Act. Nonetheless, that's something that everybody does know about and references. So it's something that this group, at the very least, will want to accomplish. This is not a public meeting, it's no decisions being made here. But still, those are kind of the best practices that are still important to pay attention to in terms of notification. So there's other ways to increase the notification out to different groups. Let's hear it to be able to get it accomplished. Okay? Some additional issues on structure. One group, somebody, I'm the facilitator today. I've always found over time that someone does need to run a meeting, at least be the nominal consistency location. So this is where the county, either Scott or someone on your staff, will be the nominal manager chair through this process for opening, closing, and facilitating for overall consistency. Now, right now, we have this meeting planned like today. It's 1 to 4:30 in the afternoon. We've heard over time that maybe that's not the best time. Maybe there needs to be an evening meeting. Maybe it needs to alternate between an evening or during the day. That's something that you'll have to work out over time and see what works best. But I think everything is open for discussion. So, and thank you to Clear Lake again for today's meeting here in this location. But maybe you want to alternate with Lakeport. Maybe you want to continue to use this site. I think that's something over time we're going to have to figure out. Hopefully the number of individuals involved on a quarterly basis can increase in numbers, so it makes sense to have it like a council chambers like this on a quarterly basis. So with regards to desired agenda items, I mentioned this earlier, but if you have agenda items in advance, do send them around your networks into the county so they can be logged and they can be brought up at the beginning of the meeting like we did earlier about issues that can and should be brought up during that particular meeting. And if they can't get gotten to, if that's hard to put, at that meeting, then they'll be addressed in the notes and then can be brought up at a future meeting. But this is the way at least we can keep ideas flowing to be able to come forward to make sure that issues can find a way into the public forum for discussion. The issue of equal time will be pursued, and this is an important point because this is a self-governing group, and again, there's not as many people as I thought would be here today, but that may change in the future. And we want to make sure that everybody has a chance to talk about what they want to talk about. We did nominally with the governance work group previously have those 4 main sectors. As a very rough rule of thumb, generally speaking, we'd like to make sure that of those 4 different groups that there's equal time allowed, so one group does not dominate the discussion over another group. I mean, again, that's what this is for, is to hear ideas, share thoughts, be able to bring up important issues, and discuss time and discuss particular specifics as we go forward, but make sure everybody has a chance to be able to have time talking about their particular points of view, especially if we get into something very specific like one of these projects on the larger sheet. So I have a structure here in this charter which is being followed today, the general outline for an agenda. If there's a way to do something better or something is pursued, it's certainly open for refinements, but this is to get us started for today. We do have some ground rules which essentially mirror what you heard about earlier with a little bit more detail, which are good process-related elements of how we do meetings together effectively, openly, transparently, and respectively to be able to have good dialogue. So I won't go over all of those, but it does go in a little more detail from what was discussed earlier for the meeting itself. The very last couple of items under outcomes of the forum process is this is a venue to provide input and communicate and keep dialogue channels open and ideas flowing and communication happening. It is not a decision forum. There's not going to be votes here. There's not going to be final points of view taken and defined as in a public forum like a city council meeting. This is for you to address issues of concern, something important, and really get down and roll up your sleeves with other parties, especially on the governmental side, across and different sectors like business or like tribes, with the residents to be able to talk about key important issues that need to come up and have a venue to be able to bring these issues forward. And then ultimately if however, I will say this, however, if there is, I like to use the term violent agreement, if there's a lot of strong agreement on something that exists across everybody in the room on a particular item, that's pretty powerful. That allows the ability of those in the room to be able to go back to their respective forums, whether it's county government or business, and be able to make something happen. So there is a lot of power in consensus agreement if you can get there. But it's not required, but that's something that can be a side benefit of this forum as it proceeds. So the success and the longevity of this forum is entirely based, and this is an important point, on the voluntary participation of everyone here. And everybody is encouraged to make this an important and successful group. It's a self-governing body. If the rules don't work right, or they're abused, or it's used for a particular purpose that is far outside of what the elements of the goals are of this group, which is dialogue, discussion, and an ability to coordinate on key issues, then it's just not going to be supported by everybody in the room, and it's going to fall to disuse. That's kind of the check and balance with this body. So if it's used right, it's valuable, everybody feels like it's a forum to be able to have solid discussion and be able to move forward on a quarterly basis and really do some good work together, then it's going to have the support of everybody who's in attendance, and it will be supported highly and survive well. So it's a self-moderating element of how to make it successful and owned by everybody is really important to know. So updates to this charter. At the end of the day, somebody has to own the charter, be able to move forward. Anything that is to change with this document, indeed, should come up, and there'll be a consensus-seeking approach towards that, and hopefully that can be achieved and understood and be able to be incorporated into the document itself. The owner of the document, though, for the long term, and this is the check and balance, if the DWR office also doesn't follow the rules as outlined in this document, and they don't operate in good faith to manage the charter, and that's another reason this body, unfortunately, can fail. So that's the check and balance. So Scott, even though you and your staff will be managing the process to be able to make sure this still convenes and does its thing, it's incumbent on you to do it in an open and collaborative forum and in a consensus-seeking way, especially with the charter and document we're talking about here, to make sure it's supported by everybody present, or again, the group can fall to disuse. So I spent a lot of time talking about this, but it is important, and this is the one and only long period we'll spend on this, but it's something to be able to give clear rules, make sure there's understanding of how to move forward, but to make it the most effective and supported venue so everybody across many different sectors with sometimes very different points of view have an ability to talk about their issues and converse in a safe environment, and hopefully indeed make progress together. So with that, I'll take a stop for a minute and see if there's any thoughts or comments or questions. Yes? I see two hands. Go ahead.
I just had a question regarding, you said that there are no decisions will be made, it's not an outcome of the process. So I guess I'm a little confused if all of these different stakeholders are going to be getting together and discussing issues. Shouldn't there be some decisions made and some, that there'll be some consensus directed toward the issues?
You said the magic word there at the end, consensus. If indeed there is an ability around the room and all the different sectors in the room to have consensus on a particular project or approach or issue, then it allows the city, the county, the state, the tribes, or whomever to go back to their body and say, yep, we had consensus around the room about that particular issue. Let's put it into play. Let's make it happen. So that's really the key. But beyond that ability, beyond that power of consensus, which is pretty strong, then the answer is no. There isn't going to be votes. There isn't going to be that type of issue. But this is the forum to vet and to address and discuss and to work through issues that there may be some differing opinions on, to be able to set the stage for any of whatever may be the formality that you're speaking of for a particular decision or action. I mean, I don't know, maybe it's a county board of supervisors issue, maybe it's a issue on a regulation, or it's an issue on putting a grant proposal forward to the state DWR, whatever that may be. Those are the dialogues that can happen here to get as close as possible towards that consensus. If that helps. Betsy?
Yeah, well, there's an issue that I think is really hard for me to grasp. There are a couple of existing decision-making bodies that have already been established and founded, and even though they're lying fallow at the moment, they are official groups. There is the Lake County Clean Water Program Advisory Council, which is comprised of elected officials who are voting members and staff members who are voting members, and they implement the decisions made by that collective group for implementing the NPD stormwater permit, for example.
Okay.
So that exists. There's also the Lake County Resource Management Committee, which was formed under a memorandum of understanding by multiple agencies, including Bureau of Land Management.
So I do get the point. There are other bodies that exist out there that have authority. So
right, but how come we're not? They're not included in the concept of what we're going to be doing.
they are.
Our concerns need to be addressed through some decision-making process. Not just a single city council member going back to their city council, because that isn't going to get anything done.
No, that's a good point. Let's talk about that. I mean, the discussion and dialogue that occurs here, that, let's say, pertains to one of those bodies you just mentioned, that's a powerful message that when that body meets, that you can say, we talked about this in the stakeholder forum, and this was our strong view across many different sectors. And that's a powerful message to bring to that body. So they are included. This is a separate, more generalized dialogue session to talk about any and all issues regarding lake aspects, lake projects, lake concerns. You're quite right. I'll come right back to you. You're quite right that these other bodies have their own authorities. And that's good. And so the dialogue and discussion that occurs here can then be brought back into that group and say, this particular issue did come up at the stakeholder forum, the discussion forum, and this was our result. Let's move forward on it out of that body. So there is a hub of the wheel tendril, indeed, connection to any of these other bodies that exist out there.
Well, if there isn't, then there's no point, because we can sit around and talk to each other all day long. If it doesn't go anywhere, it's pretty fruitless.
Okay.
You know, we all like each other. We're all working on the same thing. You know, that's why we're all in the same room. But if there's nowhere to take this issue for it to have action developed to deal with the problem, what's the point?
Well, the other action to make sure we're clear about this, that sitting around the table are all these other interests that have that ability. Scott's the county, Kristen and Mom are the state. We have other cities present. If there is a discussion or a point of view where there's some agreement around the room about how to act on any one particular thing, that can be done the next day. And then if it's agreed to by everybody in the room about a particular item on how to move forward and it's consistent with whatever they're dealing with within their own shops, then that's a implementation avenue. for these types of activities. Because they're here, that's the goal.
Okay, good. I would like the term stakeholder defined. Is everyone here a stakeholder? Number two, I covered a regional water quality control board meeting, and I attempted to communicate with the information officer, and I found that the structure a little bit tight, if you, just so to speak. We weren't allowed to video the meeting, and finally it was able to be videoed, even though I thought it was a public meeting. And that's one of the things that this group could overcome possibly.
Well,
So what
it's
is
being
the
videoed right
stakeholder?
now, as a matter of
Yeah,
fact.
what
So
is the stakeholder?
stakeholders, everybody in the room.
Are we all?
Everybody's stakeholders,
Because in that-
including the governmental agencies.
Yeah,
at the table.
in that meeting, it was only the state agencies that were stakeholders, or the responsible parties, I'm sorry.
No, I
Yeah,
would say
everybody's a
Everybody's
stakeholder.
everybody's a stakeholder.
Good.
Everybody has their perspective. Everybody, some have authorities, some don't. Some are residents. Some have businesses, but everybody's a stakeholder.
That's really cool. Thank
And yes, we are being videotaped. It is a public meeting, so that's fine.
Good.
You know. Other thoughts? And we're about to enter into this open mic period we talked about earlier, so there'll be plenty more time to talk about particular issues overall too. But I just wanted to see if there are any particular comments on the charter document as we're rolling forward.
Well, I'm just concerned about the fact that we're going to be sitting here and doing these meetings. I don't understand the outcome, because if an organization wants one of the defining things, city, county, state, if they feel like they want to do something and they think there was consensus, is there going to be minutes at the meeting that state?
We're taking notes. Yeah,
Okay.
there will be notes at every meeting.
you.
So that, and who do they get turned over? I mean.
They're yours, they're everybody's.
Well, I know that, but I'm not gonna run down and give it to the county, because I think the county board of supervisors ought to do something, because I don't have that right. So how's that gonna be communicated to them?
So is your question, how will
How do we get information from here that actually gets out?
Okay, well, and let me see if this answers your question. I mean, we do, notes are important, and so notes will be taken at every one of these quarterly meetings. And this is a process step, but I would say there's in the sign-in sheet, in terms of being able to get it back out to everybody that attended here today, and we have emails that can be like we have been doing with the previous governance work group, is distributing those notes, as well as this may be, I didn't mention it specifically in here, but perhaps it's something that could be posted along with the next agenda by, in this case, it would be county, to make sure that it's available and reachable, if that's what you're referring to, in terms of access. I mean, the idea is transparency. I mean, that's what this is for. If this doesn't serve your purposes in terms of being able to have a venue to ask the questions, work with different parties across different sectors to bring up important key issues and work through issues and work on projects to better Lake County, then this group isn't doing its job. Does that help?
So yes, I just feel like we don't have a recommendation. I like the word advisory board more because it's a specific consensus that was arrived.
But it's not an advisory board.
No, I know that.
Yeah.
I know that.
This is an open forum, discussion ability, public meeting to address
I
any
guess
of
I'm
the
looking
issues.
for some reason to make sure that I spend this amount of time.
That's up to
know,
you.
No, I
Yeah.
understand that, but I'm not understanding how it's actually gonna cause some action to be done, because I'm concerned about the lake.
That's what this is for.
All these
Okay.
people here.
Yeah.
I think it's great. We got all these people coming to listen. I think that's
Well, we've been having at least this many and more for the last 5-6 months.
Seven.
That's enough.
So let's move. Did I hear something?
7 months.
7. Moving forward on to, and this is kind of an extension of what we were just doing, but a standard agenda item that we'll have in each of these meetings is where anybody can discuss any particular item at all that's important to them. To Eric, bring it up, and it's respectfully requested to keep it to 3 to 5 minutes or so, so everybody who has a chance, who wants to talk about something can, and we have a few minutes to do that. So, I mean, yeah, it's kind of akin to the open mic thing at city council meetings, but it's not. It's not that strict, but it's general parameters in a respectful way, so you don't take over a meeting for 20 minutes, but everybody does have a chance to talk about any item that's on their mind that they want to talk about and bring up publicly. So we have that for now. Are there issues? Maybe a quick show of hands, since the folks would like to speak on particular items. 1, 2, others? 3? Okay, I'm going to start with you, ma'am.
Okay, I've been attending supervisor meetings and doing news for various publications for a long time. And I came across information. I always come across information. And this time I got published in the Times-Star. And I really respect the hard work that Scott does and Mark does and Betsy Kahn, everybody works, and Mike. Everybody works very hard. This is a piece of information for a very long time. We've been asked by state agencies to about the nutrient load and what is in the lake. There are many things in the lake, along with federal agencies. I think federal should be up there along with state. So what I found is that the Safe Drinking Water Group, Drinking Water and Radiation, California Department of Health, actually has measurements of the raw water, the microsystems in the raw water around the lake. And Amy Little did a test last summer. That's Mark Simpson, and she's going to send a letter to all the water companies that take water from the lake for drinking. But other agencies, such as, that I've heard of, such as the Department of Water Resource, the Regional Water Quality Control Branch, is asking Lake County to monitor. And here we've already got the raw water measured, the microsystems in raw water measured. And that's going to come out this week. And I'm, of course, going to write a story about it in my little paper here, but I'm trying to alert the state that in many instances, as well as us in Lake County, we don't listen and we don't act, and we're not open to other information. And this is what's happened here. And I talked to Ray Rubinski about it, I talked to Karen Tate about it, and they're all excited because they didn't realize that this raw water had a measurement here. So I think it's real exciting that we're doing this and sharing information. And I think the state agencies also need to be open to sharing the information that might already be available. And I know Mark told me 2 years ago to call Amy Little. I finally did. And maybe he already knows this. But the different water companies haven't shared the information with the other state agencies because they're all independent and they need to be interdependent like we're trying to be here. And so I'm going to pass out my stories of water column 1, water column 2, and also a story about Dr. Zabalian. He's been talking about his figures for so long, his testing in the lake. Well, I finally got him to share his numbers with Tom Smythe. Okay, that's all. I think this is a great idea, and I think we do need to learn and listen and communicate at the local level, but we haven't heard from the Superfund site, the federal toxic waste site we have over here. And it was said on the radio that the lake is the most toxic and mercury in the whole world. Where did they get that information? Is it true? And how is the state networking with them to find out what the present situation is? Okay, I'll stop. I thank you for letting me get on my soapbox.
The reasons for this, we didn't capture that, so thank you.
And I will pass out these papers.
So you have something to pass out, you said?
Yeah.
Did you want to do that now or
break.
at the break? Okay. Okay, great. About Mike and Betsy. Those are the other two, right? Okay.
I have questions about how we ended up here and why we should go on from this point with this group. We've spent 7 months here. I spent half a day driving around putting out flyers for this meeting at the local coffee shops, the local supermarkets, the library, we have 3 members of the public here that have not attended previous meetings. That's it. I have consistently, from the beginning, said, you know, that if you want interaction with the public in this county, you're going to have to hold these meetings at night or on the weekends. That, for whatever reason, has been ignored. We haven't even tried. Basically, the people in this room represent the state, the federal, and the county, and the citizens. The citizens make up the biggest chunk, and it's the same group. We've come to, you know, virtually all of the meetings. The tribes are not represented here today. Business isn't represented here today. Their participation has waned in the governance work group. Quite frankly, I haven't seen the value of I haven't seen the discussion factor involved here. And I'm pretty disappointed in this whole process, quite frankly. The fact that it's now going to be turned over to the county, you know, the most outstanding statement from this whole 7-month process, in my mind, was in the initial feelings expressed and analyzed by the various groups and by our facilitator. When the county said they felt threatened, Adam, you characterized it as, you know, a bunker mentality. Scott, you agreed with that, and yet we haven't had a discussion about that. Why it is that the county feels threatened, and what needs to be done to mitigate that so that we can move forward. And until that's done, I really don't see that we're going to have any success here, because we don't have that dialogue taking place.
Okay, thank you. Betsy?
Sure, we got 3 things I want to mention, along with Joan's discussion of outreach and what Mike did. You know, Scott's department provided me with 50 hard copies of that flyer that Kristen produced, and I gave some of them to Mike. I personally distributed them in the communities between Lakeport and Waco. I was able to get the PSA, the public service announcement, onto Waco magazine. Of course, we didn't actually get the correct linkage on the flyer until like Thursday. That wasn't very much notice. But I also sent it to every recipient of the Lake County Clean Water Program newsletter, and there's over 115 people on that newsletter, everybody from the state all the way down. I don't know if we have any, yeah, we got some federal people on that newsletter that received that newsletter. So, you know, the effort to get people here, to get them to even ask a question. The only person that responded from the newsletter email list was Scott McReynolds from the Northern California IRWM branch. And his branch has been very helpful to us. We happen to be within their boundary for water monitoring. Mr. Ehorn does our groundwater monitoring. Perry LeBoeuf does our surface water monitoring. Those pieces of information are available to Holly and the Central Valley Board, even though they come from the Northern California IRWM region. Apparently, Kristen and Hung are from the Northern Central region, and so there's no real, you know, we discovered there's like a separation of communication there. And so I'm finding that I would like to see that we have a task force that really makes sure we have communications with all of these agencies. Obviously, just the public doing the effort of getting public information out there just isn't going to get it. It just isn't. And the other thing is, you know, the number of people here, who are literally paid to be here have a vested interest in making this management system work. We would like to help that happen. That's our goal. We want to make that happen. And so the distinction between this agency and that sort of thing, that I believe is what was addressed by the Resource Management Committee. Because then it had some connectivity to decision making. I'm seeing this dead end at no decision making. We're here to take your, just like thank you for your input, Benedict. You're not going to motivate people who are not going to have some sense of buy-in on the decision-making process. So that's just how I'm seeing it. Now, that doesn't mean that people are not working together. Eva's been a part of a Soda Bay water treatment, special districts advisory group there for, I don't know how many years, Eva? Since it started, okay. So there's an agency that has an advisory group of citizens that have a vested interest in their decision-making process for their water system. Now that's an effective decision-making process and develops the buy-in from the stakeholders. What I'm not seeing is buy-in from stakeholders being developed by the agencies that are responsible for the Clean Water Program. And so most of these things that are projects on this list have to do with how are we going to implement the Clean Water Program? How are we going to improve the watershed? How are we going to get the lake off the 3 of 3 list? How are we going to raise the property values? How are we going to support, quality monitoring that's meaningful? All of those kinds of decisions. I'd like to see that this really, that we had some kind of a proactive task force to do that, not just a quarterly conversation. I'd really like to see something substantive come out of this. So,
Thank you. Go ahead.
I'd like to have a comment here. Last meeting was the first meeting I participated. We actually had some very constructive conversations. And as a result of last meeting, and we talked a lot about the groundwater issue, Kristen had sent out to this group a lot of groundwater related information. I think that was the reason you connected with our Northern Region office. And one thing, Betsy, you mentioned is there's no coordination or between the region offices. That is inaccurate. Actually, the 4 region offices under integrated regional water management divisions, we keep close contact with each other. Lake County, if you just look at our region office boundary, there are a boundary. However, groundwater basins and also watershed boundaries sometimes go across. And we work closely with Northern Region. Interestingly, actually, Lake County groundwater basin, all the monitoring, all the things actually are being done by the Northern Region office. That's why the staff there, they're more familiar with the information. However, those general information Kristen forwarded, that's, I believe that helps the group to understand general issues. So with that said, I do see this as a very valuable group, and the connections with us, we thought DWR has great groundwater information, didn't realize, hey, you didn't know we have that information. Through this group, we got you guys connected with our technical expert. That's our historical role, and I believe that is always DWR's role, and we will continue to do that. We are the technical expert, groundwater, surface water. Again, I have to say, we, in terms of integrated regional water management, DWR does not have regulatory responsibilities. We're here to support the regional water management group. The regional water management group is a diverse stakeholder. With here, you have 4 stakeholder group. I think you've already had a great platform, and through DWR's facilitation services, and we hope this group continue to carry on. You've already had work products, actually preliminary form here on this work plan, and DWR's desire is to, through this collaborative process, I have to emphasize again, let's all focus on this work product. And through the regional forum discussion, the group can reach consensus, and then you can bring that to your governing bodies, whether it's a board of supervisors. In the meantime, DWR will participate as much as we can. If there are future funding resources, we will make sure this group get all the necessary information. We get all the necessary technical information to you. So that's my comment.
thank you for explaining that.
Sure.
Yes.
I just, another little follow-on is originally, the reiterated a few times, but originally I was kind of hoping that through the West Side RWM, Lake County could kind of be strengthened through this stakeholder or facilitation services here to kind of form your own regional water management subgroup to the West Side RWM, to be able to have a stronger voice in that group. And I was hoping that this could be just a forum or discussion place to talk about the projects that needed to be prioritized and moved forward and up into that plan. So I think that even if this isn't a decision-making group, I think it's still a good venue for talking about projects that are of common interest, and then bringing it back to the West Side group and saying, hey, we all agree on this. This is all something that's important to us, and we want it in the plan to be a possible project for funding in the future.
Other thoughts? Yeah.
I just have one concern. I don't want this to kind of become a pacifier for people that have strong concerns and want to voice them. A group where, I just don't want this to become that. You've been heard. Here's your pacifier. You got your cordial. You said what you needed to say. There you go. Now go away. I don't want this to be a pacifier. I want this to be, and that's what my concern is, because I understand the nature of the way things work.
It's an interesting, I'll come right back to you, it's an interesting kind of glass half full, glass empty approach to the way you bring it up. I mean, you're right. I mean, it's not intended to be that. But on the flip side, we also heard very loudly that there was a need to have continued discussion, people to have a venue and a forum to have a dialogue about these key issues, because there was a criticism that wasn't happening. So I guess what you're getting at is where's the balance? So there are constructive dialogues that can occur, issues can be discussed, opinions can be voiced, and potentially, as Kristen just articulated, potentially find a way to have those come together as joint interests, whether it's a project or a policy or an approach, to be able to move forward. And I think that's up to this group to self-regulate that, actually. I'll come back in a second, Betsy. Go ahead.
And I want to stand up for the different state agencies. The people in Lake County really do care, and they really do get active. And a fellow named David Coleman realized that, I'm sorry to say it, I believe it was the Department of Water Resources was making a deal with Bottle Rock Power Plant about decommissioning without letting the CEC know. And the CEC people came right out and had a public hearing, and everything was aired. So I think if we find the right little niche to tickle, they will respond. We just have to find out how to do it. Maybe this group could be a vehicle for that.
At least to air the issues, that's exactly right. Betsy.
Okay, so the entity that represents people in Lake County, everybody in Lake County, within the structure of the West Side Integrated Regional Water Management Group is the Watershed Protection District. It is not the Department of Water Resources.
Okay. We have had a lot of discussion about this in previous years. Previous years. Previous meetings.
Must feel like that.
And this was raised earlier as a topic. So why don't we just bring this out in the open right now to discuss this, to address it.
It's a logical segue.
And see. Scott, do you have thoughts or comments on Watershed Protection District?
Well, we've talked about this a number of times. Watershed Protection District is a separate district, and its operations are managed by the Department of Water Resources. It has a budget, it's Budget Unit 8109. It has revenue, has expenses. I don't know what else to say.
Okay.
Can I explain why I raised that question in this context, please?
Go ahead.
Kristen, when you're talking about how the regional groups can then raise the bar or address funding from Prop 84, for example, based upon the local, let's say the consensus or mandates or whatever it is that's here, it is the watershed protection district that I would go to, in theory, and say, hey, we've got a problem with a dam or a creek bed or whatever, okay? And Scott knows, I've been working on trying to understand the structure of that district separately for years as a part of this local agency formation commission. The reason I ask that question is because the district has sort of become a de facto thing. I mean, it started out as flood control. The functions were defined under flood control. When the district was formed by legislation, it just kind of never occurred to anybody to decide that we needed other services or other structures or other support. And so I feel as though Scott's been burdened with having a limited staff because it's based upon the old concept of the district itself. We're trying to help the Board of Supervisors, for example, understand its responsibility to help Scott because of the fact that they don't seem to get it, that he doesn't have the additional resources to meet the watershed protection district requirements, and we'd love to have that done. We really would. The movement in the counties since the 1990s with collaboration with the multiple agencies plus local coordinated resource management groups, the Middle Creek Crimp, the Kelsey Crimp, all those things. You've got a system here where people who live here want to help protect the watershed. We're just trying to figure out how to make that linkage to...
Well, it sounds like, I may be wrong, but it sounds like in the absence of any other clarification or Board of Supervisor action, as you articulated with regard to the Watershed Protection District, the Department of Water Resources is the manager of the Watershed Protection District in the interim, so it would be having those discussions about those items you just mentioned for Scott and his staff to move forward, correct?
I mean, that would be the logical thing to assume. It's just that his staff does not have the capacity to take that on. As he said many times, I don't have the people. I don't have the money. I don't have the funding. I don't have the resources. And we know that. So if the state is expecting that we're going to raise this level of collaborative, self-governing, effective interaction so that we can, prioritize these major projects and whatnot and get support for them from the legislative bodies, that's a really important thing to understand. There's a linchpin here that's missing.
I guess I'm just going to raise this to everybody in the room, that I don't know if that's necessarily the case in terms of, it sounds like your assertion is that without some other awareness or official recognition of the Watershed Protection District, that the activities of this group or joint priority setting or discussion on projects that may be able to go forward to the west side or others wouldn't be valid. And I
didn't say it wouldn't be valid.
Well, I'm putting words in your mouth.
Yes, you are.
But I'm trying to find what the right word is. So I guess, let me take a step back.
Sure.
What I'm trying to say is that I don't believe, from what I'm hearing, I think I'm wrong, Scott, but the Watershed Protection District is not a linchpin for this group to be able to move forward to west side.
Aha. Because it is our linchpin to the west side.
I need some help here from Kristen. I don't hear that at all, though. I don't hear that at all. I don't hear that that's a linchpin. This group can bring forward any project it wants to.
To whom?
To the west side, correct?
Through what?
Through what vehicle?
Through what vehicle?
Through the Lake County Watershed Protection District.
Amen.
I'm finishing.
Okay.
The staff is the same staff as DWR. So if you bring it forward to anybody there, it will come to the west side. If you brought it to my attention, it would go to the west side. We're all listening. This is just a process for talking about it.
Okay, then I have to talk about the elephant in the room.
Okay?
The Watershed Protection District staff is not responsive. So
I got to do a ground rule violation here.
Sure.
Because that's. And
we
have to move past that, Betsy, because we have answered your question several times. Your question has been answered several times. The person in the room is the Department of Water Resources, is the effective manager of the Watershed Protection District. we are taking everybody's time in the room to discuss this issue, and that concerns me as a facilitator because we've answered the question several times. It is Scott DeLeon, it is the DWR, Kristen has said it, Scott has said it. We do need to move on to another topic because that has been answered several times. Any project that comes forward out of this group that is seen as a valid, important project out of this room, based on this worksheet that we're talking about, can go through, I just heard, out of 2 locations directly to the west side. Either Kristen or DWR, who manages the Watershed Protection District, Scott can take it to them. End of statement. So I want us to move on. So
Okay.
this is drilling down in an area that we've answered several times, and I would like, and I'm glad it's being videotaped.
The
because
problem
we need to
hasn't
put
been
this-
addressed.
Wait.
The problem
Okay, what's the
hasn't been
problem?
addressed.
What's the problem?
The problem of not having the staff there, a coordinator for people to put their input to, for Eva to ask questions from, it's not Scott's fault. It's the structure. There isn't the capacity for this to be carried forward. He can have the job all day long if he doesn't have the support.
I'm struggling to find out what the question is or what the issue is.
The question is, do you know about Oakland? There's a very famous quote about Oakland.
Yeah, I'd like to stay on the question with Betsy.
I'm on
any
it.
quotes.
Betsy,
I'm
on it.
No, I don't.
No, don't interrupt me. I'm on it.
Okay, I'm going to call a timeout for the room. We're going to have a timeout. We're going to close the meeting for about 10 minutes, and we're going to come back and see if we can have another go at this with regards to proper attitudes, because that tone was not appropriate in the room, Mike, and that is not allowed in this forum, or this forum will not be
I'm
successful.
sick of you interrupting everybody.
Okay. So we're taking a 10-minute break, and we'll go and we'll come back again in 10 minutes. That is a very good. What was that, Mike?
I said, let's not address the question.
What's the question? What wasn't addressed?
The dialogue, the lack of dialogue.
Lack of dialogue about what?
Okay, I'll go over it again. January or February, I don't remember the meeting, you characterized the county's response as being bunker-like. Scott said he agreed.
So I'm going to make a call right here because this is older territory that the governance work group did spend quite a bit of time on, and I received quite a bit of input back in more than one meeting when this issue was brought back up, Mike, that there was a lot of emphasis in the room to say, let's move past that. Let's move on to the flow. Let's move on to the project, the content, the issues. I, as facilitator, am going to make a call today, and you can do whatever you want in the future meetings. I don't think that's a productive use of time today when everybody's dying to look at the content and products and actual content-related elements that was so productive at the last meeting. So I'm going to make a universal call and say we're going to move forward. That is something that has been addressed in past meetings and doesn't have a place in this forum. If there's a particular issue between you and the county and the statement you say, I highly encourage you to get Scott offline and discuss that issue. But it's not a place to discuss it here in front of everybody in this room when we have valuable time. We want to move forward on actual content-related elements that I'm repeatedly told is what everybody wants to work on. So if there's a desire for you to reach out to Scott after today to address that issue, I highly encourage it. So let's pull out this sheet right now. Let's talk about this. This is our content that we've had some very good discussions about this offline. And I'd like to remind everybody about some criteria that, and let me reframe this a little bit. And Kristen, you're the author really of this. So if there's anything here that you want to add to this regarding since the last meeting, please jump in. But the genesis of what was really a very valuable discussion last time was we looked at this list and we pulled segments out of this list, projects, issues, initiatives that were important to any one person, basically, who had a particular interest in a particular area. And at one point we started going down sequentially. Looking at these criteria, and I saved this sheet of paper from the last meeting because it was a good starting point. What was our criteria that we were having discussions on these projects about? Our criteria that we looked at this was basically the following. One was which one of these, in other words, this is prioritization of our attention and time on projects. Which of these projects were most likely for common ground in the room in terms of interest that has been shown over time, that has the most chance of finding some agreement to be able to go forward on a particular project or initiative? Another was, could that particular project, move to a possible funding source that was identified? And several came up actually in the last discussion. I mean, there was the West Side process, there was another grant process. Greg Dills isn't here today, but he talked about a particular grant program.
EPA 319H.
EPA 319H, that was one, thank you. So that, and I think there even was another. So, but the issue was, can this project, once worked on, vetted, and discussed, possibly have a potential funding source that could fulfill it, that it could be directed towards? With the recent initiative not passing, I think the funding element of these takes even a more heightened level of importance to be able to move forward. The third was, which of these, another criteria was, which of these come forward as being the most urgent by all involved? In other words, does it have some regulatory component that drives its level of need to be done quickly? Is there some deadline that the particular project is tied to? So is there an urgency related to some type of a regulatory or other related requirement? So that was another criteria. And then we added one other, that's right, down here. This was the last one that was added halfway through the last meeting, which was there a critical application of a particular project that related to specific direct health and safety to the lake? So this was a kind of an overarching health and safety criteria. Does a particular project have a potential very quick, very strong, very direct application to a health and safety impact? So these four criteria, likely for common ground, what is there a potential funding source that may be able to be applied to it? What is reaching essential consensus around the room on what's urgent? What is most urgent? Is there a regulatory or other particular need for something, like a timeline that's pushing it? And then also, is there a direct health and safety impact? So those are the four criteria we used last time, which launched us into a very good discussion on various projects that helped us understand and refine some of these projects that are on this list. So with that in mind, we can always go down sequentially, starting at the beginning, but is there any particular project that you want to start with that is of particular importance, or at the tip of your mind, for something that needs attention that could be brought forward for discussion that might be able to address these four criteria? So open question right now. Now we could go sequentially and see if something hits some of these criteria and it's something we should spend time on. Yes, ma'am.
I do think that everyone in Lake County is concerned about the quality of the water and the streams and the water systems in the lake. They're concerned about cyanobacteria, they're concerned about mercury, they're concerned about septic, and all the waters have all that in them. And the state agencies, and Scott has one heck of a job, because he's got to answer everybody's questions.
Can you help us drive that comment towards a particular project? And you were involved with some of the earlier discussions,
no, I wasn't.
So let me help orient you a little bit. And the way this sheet is structured is that I think it was 7, I believe, there were 7 goals that ultimately, through the discussion of the previous governance work group, we call it, that was meeting, came up with essentially with 7 particular goals that were ultimately were a very high level, at a vision level for the lake region. And under those goals, we then added in, Kristen did the heavy lifting on this, added in basically 2 layers of projects that had been identified. One was those that were identified originally back in the 2010 watershed management plan. Many of those things didn't get worked on over the course of the last several years. So under those 7 goals, those particular projects found a home on those projects in the 2010 plan, either if they were partially or not addressed, were translated in and given one that were listed underneath the most applicable of these 7 goals. And the second was that the governance work group over the last several months, last many months, had been talking about important priorities that came out of the 2010 plan? What's new information? What are new drivers that wasn't around in 2010 that are important now? One of the key examples of that is drought, climate change. So there was a lot of discussion on those particular elements that were new pieces of information, and many of those ideas formed themselves into projects. Sometimes they were successors to the projects that were identified back in 2010. So those two layers of project identification were basically lumped into and found a home under each one of these 7 goals. Like goal 1 is address strategically all sources of lake pollution on page number 2. So that's how this is organized. So if that helps those in the room who weren't part of the earlier discussion.
And we're actually down to 6, because 2 goals are merged into 1.
Okay, thank you. Which were the 2 that were mixed?
On the first page, you can see it's address strategically all sources of lake pollution. We know that pursuing actions and projects that will result in the lake being removed from the 303D list. Gotcha. That's a component of that.
Thanks. So 6 goals, I stand corrected, so that helps us. It's a little more focused. So for want of another project that's being thrown out to look at on any one of these goals, why don't we take a look quickly at goal number 1 on page 2 and 3, I believe it is, and see, again, on these criteria, because at the end of the day, the ideal would be to find a project that can be redlined, essentially, and say, this is the one that is the highest priority, meeting all these criteria, or at least partially meeting these criteria, that could ultimately find their way up through either Scott Daly's own staff or directly to DWR with Kristen, that may have a chance of getting some attention, possible funding by the West Side or one of these other funding sources. Mike.
Goal number 4.
Goal number 4. Okay.
Speaking of funding,
that's page 7. Go ahead.
The question of managing invasive species, prevention of future infestations.
Okay.
My understanding that the state has begun accepting applications for money from the Boating and Waterways Department of Motor Vehicles Fund. And I would like to know if we've applied for that, and if so, how much.
Would that be an application, how would the application go forward? Would that be through the county, or would that be a different entity?
The county would apply for the money, and I'm not aware of them making those applications. I don't believe that that's open. I don't believe they've established the criteria for how to apply. So I haven't heard that they're accepting applications.
Have you heard otherwise, Mike?
Yeah. Okay.
Adam, can I add?
Yeah.
Mike, is it possible you forward a link if you have information regarding that grant, or is it possible you forward a link to the county to see if that grant is currently available, or what is the timeline?
They have an action that they're talking about doing, which is the readoption of the emergency, there was an action that they took to create that funding source, and it was an emergency declaration or an emergency act, and I believe they're pursuing the second adoption of that, but I'm not aware of any call for projects or call for applications.
Okay. So we pay the state and they get to keep the money?
Yeah, that's what they're doing. They'll make it available eventually, but we haven't, and we're waiting. We've
So it's been requested? That
oh yeah,
yeah.
we've asked a number of times when will we be able to apply, and they know that we're waiting.
What is this fund called again, just for the notes, what is it called?
Well, it's on the BMV license, you renew. You get to pay money, then you get to pay money here in the county for some too.
Get to.
The Quagamuffle thing.
Kristen, go ahead.
Yeah, I had also spoken with them back in, I want to say it was March, and it sounded like it wasn't going to be open until the next fiscal year.
They get to keep a whole year?
Well, I think it was, they were expecting applications to kind of start to be up around then. So I didn't think it was available yet. But
We paid it.
No, the funds,
the
they
state
haven't
funds
made the
through
funds
the-
available.
They
haven't
got the
made
money
funds.
though. So
The
that's the way
state
it
is a
works.
very
They just take,
complicated
they just
process.
take the money, but they don't have to give it where it goes.
They hadn't established they hadn't established how they were going to, evaluate proposals. It's all a work in progress.
Yeah, does somebody in some other county where they don't even have a lake, they're paying it? They are, everybody in the whole state's paying it.
If you own a boat, you pay for it unless your boat is marine or ocean going only.
Okay.
Mike, in your description on this one on 4, where you're referring to, it says here, manage invasive species, C652 to 656, all of below were kind of lumped into your description of if funding source could be found, that these would apply, and therefore 6.5.2 to 6.5.6 would all be essentially, ideally, put into kind of one project application. Is that what you were thinking of?
Well, the overarching requirement for all of these projects would be to keep quagga and zebra mussels out of the lake. Because if they're in the lake, then all of this kind of goes away.
Sure. Well, the reason I'm honing in on that is and this may be a discussion that has to happen later on because the funding source isn't available, but maybe there'll be another one. But to be able to hone in on a particular project that can be scoped out specifically from this list, that could then, I think that would have a, correct me if I'm wrong, DWR, but that would have a lot of strength with West Side or others that you're talking to in terms of needing funding, because it has a very specific, identified kind of project scope and desired outcome.
A lot of scientific data exists currently on what happens to a water body after it's infested by quagga and zebra mussels. And most of that data is not good in terms of water quality. So in terms of what we need to do to protect the 17 plus water purveyors that draw water from the receiving water body, we need to keep the quagga and zebra mussels out.
Right.
So, can IRWM give us a grant to help us keep the quagga and zebra mussels out in order to maintain the water quality at a hyper-eutrophic point in the lake that it currently is at? I don't know.
Well, it sounds like as this funding source gets potentially more, well, ideally accessible to be able to be applied for, and we'll capture it in the notes that it looks like these 4 items, specifically 6.5.2 to 6.5.6 on page 7, are highly possible candidates to be able to accomplish what you're talking about in terms of really talking about a specific project that could receive funding to accomplish that. So, but it's something at least for the future we'll capture. Go ahead.
Yeah, I comment. I think one of the things we kept on saying is we identify project. Is this project developing a weed management plan, or is this project doing additional public outreach, doing specific inspection? I hope we can see those projects in terms of IRWM funding, and as Proper 84, that is the only available IRWM fundings at this time. And the most immediate one is 2014 drought funding. That one has specific categories. For this specific issue here, that this problem or a project like this wouldn't be fitting into those categories. However, there's a 2015 solicitation, because for the drought funding, state has decided we're going to cap the funding area. The maximum funding is 75%. With that said, and you still have about 25% of the funding from this remaining IRWM pot of money available for 2015. So my recommendation is for this group, think about what kind of project you can bring together whether it's outreach or whether it's a plan, well, no, actually I shouldn't say plan, because what's this funding funds is implementation project. Yeah, it's not planning of grant anymore, so what kind of implementation type of project you can bring in? And Mike, you just mentioned linking that to water supply reliability. If you have this cross of muscles, it will significantly impact your water supply. So that you just integrated, you have to, you know, incorporate these water quality and water supply, all incorporate that together. I think we need to identify a project we can demonstrate. By doing this project, we can remove the invasive species, although in the meantime also the ensure water supply. We have to come up with an implementable project, not just a plan. So I think if the group, that's you know, for this specific goal, if we can come up with a project and put that back to the, bring that back to the west side, that would be for the 2015 solicitation.
2015 solicitation?
Yeah, 2015 solicitation, they were, last time we were told around summer next year, that's the earliest time they are going to issue the project proposal criteria or package. So, and I think from now on till next spring, and if we can come up with a project and then put in the west side IRWM plan, there will be an opportunity.
Okay, so I'd like to raise a question. Mr. Special Districts, you had trouble last year, right? So that causes a problem because you have insufficient capacity out of groundwater. So you needed to do an intertie transfer, right? Or
we used the intertie for our North Lakeport water system with City of Lakeport.
but that was attributable to water quality issues and groundwater issues combined, right?
It was just surface water quality.
Okay.
North Lakeport's a surface water plant.
Okay.
But doesn't the city get groundwater?
The city gets
The
groundwater.
city got groundwater from their Scotts Valley.
Okay. So
So
can
put
we
that in here.
can we not tie those together then as a drought-related issue, because our groundwater level is going to be impacted the second year of the drought?
That may be possible. I'd have to talk to Mark Brannigan about it with their supply issues. I think the stronger argument is if you're looking at Clear Lake itself, whether it's algae or quag or whatever, it seems that with the 17 water systems, everybody can come together with water resources and put an application in to do things like the quagga thing, inspection stations, whatever that is. I think a pretty good argument could be made there.
For source protection.
Source protection, right? Okay.
Is that like 6.5?
Would that qualify?
Well, I couldn't say whether it's qualified, but it does sound like an integrated project. And just to keep in mind, every round of grant, the requirement will be a little bit different. Like this, well, it's all integrated. There are 16 standards you have to comply, but this drought is focusing on the drought. We will have to see the condition, right? If the drought continues, the next round there is a chance they still focus on the drought. But like what you just mentioned, you can relate this to drought as well. But what I hear is all the 17 districts, if you work together with county, keep in mind when statewide funding is very competitive, you have to demonstrate these programs a lot of the time are not locally cost effective. And also whatever is a benefit from this project will benefit the entire region. So if all the districts
17 people, you would increase their reliability of water supply, the quality of water supply, all those checklists that I've just been going down on the applications I'm currently working on, it would meet them all. So I think it would be a very strong application based on the points of the IRWM application.
So can we make that a priority project?
Let's talk about that, in fact, yeah. I mean, it's, so under goal number 4, I guess it sounds like, can we pull elements out of what's there, or are we essentially modifying this to something that would be clearly in the range of potentially, because that's what we're talking about off of our criteria list, is could it indeed, like you're saying, be one that can be viewed as meeting the criteria of that particular funding source? And it sounds like very possible.
With or without draft, would you need a draft to make
Right.
that?
It's just that it adds some emphasis to it now. The developing of boat cleaning stations around Clear Lake, 6.52, is that one of a related element that we're talking about here?
I think it is.
Because that's a very specific action item, shovel-ready, so to speak, project.
Yeah, and again, not familiar with the West Side project process. July 21st, that's the application due date. This sounds like a great project. I'm even thinking, in this area, there are a lot of disadvantaged communities, and in the application package, I think you have some extra point for addressing that issues. So the project itself sounds like integrated, addressing water quality, water supply issues, also to help benefit some of the disadvantaged communities as well as drought. It does sound like a great project. The only thing I'm thinking here is whether you're able to put together this project.
Not for this round.
No.
Right.
Not
We've
for this
already-
round.
we've
Yes, for the
already frozen this
2015.
round.
Probably for the 2015, definitely, I see this as a very good project.
So it's not the July 21 date you're talking about?
No, this one, July 21st, that was just for the drought funding, this immediate drought funding. But for 2015, we have from now until next spring or early summer to come up with a project and also compare with.
What's the deadline for the 2015 fund?
Well, at this time, DWR tentatively said our financial assistance branch, they plan to issue the project solicitation package in probably early summer in 2015. So by that time, we will know the specific application deadline. But typically, if you want to have a project, and I would say before summer 2015, you should have the outline for the project, who are the stakeholders, what is your, a lot of the project require local funding, you have local match, or what is the timeline, and how are you going to implement those projects. And there are guidelines for IRWM. You just have to compare your project with the guidelines.
So what do you think about the next meeting of this group, at the very least, if not earlier, like you were mentioning, subcommittees or some other task force to come together, to actually start vetting some of these variables, these details we're talking about here? It'd be great to get wherever the right source would be. I don't know if that's through state or otherwise, to get the criteria for the 2015 as much as possible, understanding they haven't released their final criteria, if I'm hearing you right.
We can use a general IRWM guideline, that's for the plan. But
Prop 84 guidelines,
yeah,
general Prop 84 guidelines.
you also have West Side IRWM. West Side IRWM also have the region priority as well. I think we can use these both documents. Actually, West Side IRWM, once accepted by the state, that just to demonstrate it's consistent with the state standards. So
And we're waiting for that to happen.
right, and you can use West Side IRWM guideline and plan actually.
The plan review process has been completed, and it should, I think it's almost about the 30 days have been up for public review. So I'm pretty sure the plan, it was passed by DWR, it was just pending public comment. So I'm assuming that is close to closing or has closed. So the plan is consistent with DWR.
And the plan is what again, specifically?
Consistent with DWR's guidelines, with the Proposition
Prop
84
guidelines.
Yeah, it's called West Side Integrated Regional Water
Oh,
Management.
that one, okay.
Yeah.
That didn't make
I think we can definitely use that plan and the standard setting up all their project-specific evaluation criteria, and to see how we can fit our project there. Maybe first thing is, what are some of the stakeholders, what districts would be interested, and how we can.
Well, as I understand it, one of the priorities that was established by the original water management group and that really took initial attention was the invasive species prevention program.
Yeah.
And I think that there's probably no agency in this room that isn't concerned about that. So coming up with that project, whether it's putting in boat stations or the launch ramp controls, whatever it is that the design of that program would be, is a very high priority.
So I'm hearing a couple things take shape, and this is a good takeaway for the notes and for action between now and the next meeting, and communication to occur from, really it's the state, from other interested parties, and also Scott's staff is going to have to get involved in this as well as this issue. So I'm hearing that around the world of invasive species, and we are specifically identifying off of our list, a starting point is 6.52, developing the boat cleaning stations around Clear Lake. There may be several other elements to that that can either come off this list or be thought of out of this list or something else related. So the content of what this might look like needs to be vetted out a little bit of the project, as well as learning as much as possible on these issues, what those likely guidelines are going to look like, so we could start connecting it to. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that throughout this last few years of working on these plans and so forth, the key thing that has been missing is having the impetus from the water distribution operators to collectively put in their 2 cents or 50 cents, whatever you want, to say this is a source supply issue, not just a boating issue, not just a recreation issue, but a water supply issue. And we have for years, tried to marry the two sides of water management in terms of informational exchange. The water purveyors and the Department of Water Resources with their water quality responsibilities. So
we did start to get that message out in the watershed sanitary survey.
Exactly.
Which is where we had all 17 of us together for a short period of time. Sure. But you get support from us for our 2 water systems.
Sure.
It's a lot more challenging, as you said, Betsy, to get the other 15 purveyors to step up.
Well, and in the May meeting of the water purveyors convened by the California Public Health Department, one of the topics of discussion that arose and that there is an action item taken back to public health is the update of that watershed sanitary survey, because it didn't really provide action planning. It was kind of a status report. And we want those purveyors to start, being concerned about their source management.
Well, it sounds like they're going to have to be, they would be powerful, strong supporters.
They would. They would. We just have to get them on board.
And that's, the next question is who's going to take that responsibility?
You mentioned, is there a coalition?
There isn't really.
There is not.
No, there isn't.
It's real difficult to get their attention.
It's a combination of public and private. And, part of the dysfunction that we have here is that the popular belief is that we have a lake out there and we have to worry about the beneficial uses of the lake as opposed to having a reservoir, and our first priority needs to be to protect our source water for drinking.
Well, I suspect with this drought and the quality of the lake water this summer, people will be much more eager to work with whoever might come up with a solution or have funding. I think this will be the summer to get everybody's attention, because nobody's going to get through the summer without problems.
I would agree with you, but I still think we're going to have a hard time getting past the Chamber of Commerce and the Board of Supervisors promoting the lake as a recreational facility as opposed to identifying it first as our source water for drinking.
Critical water.
It's our critical water. We discussed at the last meeting, we don't even know exactly, which wells are infusion wells and which wells draw from some underground source that's sealed off from the lake.
So it sounds like there's several pieces to this. There's time, but this time tends to go fast. When we're talking about it needs to be essentially ready to go by, is it spring 2015, did you say? You're not probably?
Yeah, somewhere there. It wouldn't be earlier than 2015.
So it sounds like this last discussion about the water purveyors and stakeholders is going to happen, and if you can help with some of these, tick-offs, Kristen will capture these, because it sounds like this is the genesis of an actual thing, a project that really can be grabbed by this group to start vetting some of the missing pieces, which is talking to the water purveyors and starting to build a coalition support to this. Looking at this list, maybe going beyond this list on item 4, with regards to what would be potentially the so to speak, shovel-ready project-related elements that would make up this issue of managing invasive species. We have one piece, the load cleaning stations, but there may be several more that would fall under this project, the parameters of this project. And then learning as much as possible in terms of the parameters out there, in terms of what's expected for the grant, and how to be able to meet the expectations of this money that's going to be coming out in terms of the checking off the 16, 17 boxes, so to speak, that you refer to, and tailoring it as much as possible. So there's some critical analysis that needs to be done. They're all very doable pieces, it seems, but they do take some labor.
And I really recommend that you focus it on source protection, because that is a state mandate. The source protection itself, for public health, considers source protection very crucial.
It is very important, Betsy, I'm just thinking IRWM funding, if you're going to write a grant application,
right.
Yes, that is only one component.
Right.
You would have to extend your project, how they can achieve multiple benefits, so you cannot
Sure.
just focus on one area. For DWR, how can you, this program or the inspection program, how that help you to ensure your water supply quality, and that's also very important. So
We can help you do that.
yeah, I think that's the thing. First, together, all the stakeholders, apparently, like Kim said, it's very important for all the other districts. How can we gather all the stakeholders here, and maybe need to do a little bit of outreach education. If some of the districts, if they've already done some research, probably it's good to have a presentation from one of those districts, give kind of like general education, and maybe we also invite the business, as well as if hopefully Board of Supervisors, county staff will be there as well.
On that note, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but maybe we could frame this, and I'm going to just throw this out to the group. Maybe is there enough there to call this as a project, and maybe even make it the focus of this group coming together the next quarter, and make it the focus of that meeting to vet in detail, invite the water purveyors for the specific reasons so they can learn about this potential grant application and project taking shape. And we could get the information from, hopefully with your help, from the state with regards as much as possible in terms of what may be the parameters, in terms of the guidelines and expectations of what the grant might look like. And then the third piece was starting to vet out what these pieces of this project might very well be, the actual hard specific pieces. And really make that a very specific focus of the next meeting. So, because if you're really thinking about the timing of this, if this group, it doesn't have to be the next board, but if it's 3 months from now, and there's some homework that has to be done between now and then to get everybody to the table and make it clear there's a reason why people are coming together, which is to vet these various pieces and actually do some assignments and build support for what this might look like. That's some homework that needs to be done before the next meeting. 3 months from now would be approximately September-ish, and that's probably about as long as you want to wait before you start formulating what this might look like, because it needs to be put together then over the winter period and finalized in the early spring to be able to be an application. Does something like that make sense?
Well, once again, let me remind you that in the approved West Side Integrated Regional Water Management Plan, the invasive species prevention program was significantly important and rated as one of the first year implementation key projects for the new watershed management group. So it's not like the regional partners don't know that this is important.
And that's important because that's another impetus on top of this type of application coming forward, because it would immediately fit that requirement, that identified need.
I believe it would hit every point easily, habitat, protection, drinking water. I think the hard part is, what are we going to do? What is the solution? What's the real project? It's not getting a grant. I think that'd be pretty easy. But what's going to What's gonna get us? and
How are
solve
we
this
gonna
problem?
design the invasive species program for Lake County?
Well, we know the
That's
first,
effective.
we know the first part is 6.5.2, or at least one of the parts, which is develop boat landing stations around Clear Lake. That's one particular element. I'm sure there's many more. But yeah, that would come together to make up this overarching proposal for helping to manage invasive species.
Well,
Kristen, then back to Mike.
I haven't participated in all of the invasive species mussels or task force meetings, but are there going to be projects coming out of that?
Well, are you talking about the RWMG's invasive species task
Yeah.
force?
Yeah.
We have no idea. It was an ad hoc committee formed on April 14th.
Right.
The coordinating committee had a meeting this morning but didn't have a quorum. So we do not know. Again, without trying to drive you guys crazy, that's where our representative as a member of the RWMG, which is the district, has to be the agency that comes to us and says, here's where we're at, here's what we need.
not the other way around.
Not the other way around. We shouldn't have to go and talk to the regional group about it. You know what I'm saying?
Right, and I didn't mean it like that. I was just curious, as Lake County constituents, participants, have you brought forward any specific projects that you, other than these ones that are already from the?
Oh, yes, ma'am.
You have?
Oh, yes, ma'am, over
So-
the years.
Right, so can we also get those down in here?
Or are they
Sure.
already here?
Apologies.
Are they already here?
No, no.
As an aside, I have a question. This list seems significantly different than the last one that we reviewed. Am I wrong?
It's not-
Was
it's
this
not
condensed or something?
Other than goal 1 and goal 4, which was originally goal 4, has been merged together to just be goal 1. And now, what used to be 5 is now 4, it used to be 6 is now 5, and what used to be 7 is now 6. That's the only thing that's different, is 1 and 4 were
Okay,
merged.
okay, so there was some
Based
kind of
on
condensing.
the discussion from last
Right.
time.
So,
But if there are specific projects that fall under this goal that we can put on here, let's do that.
and which is the particular goal, to manage invasive species?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, I know that Scott for years has been trying to, see, this is Scott's dilemma. Our board of directors, that again, wants to market the hell out of this place and doesn't support the habitat or the environmental programs. Scott's tried to get road launch ramps controlled, blocked, locked off, whatever it is. We've identified a bunch of that work that needs to be done. We've identified the need for a specific map to identify parcels that have vulnerable launch ramps. We know we need an ordinance that will penalize the private launch ramp.
Can we capture
owners.
those things here? I want
Do you want the list? I mean, I can give
to,
you.
yeah, we do want the list. We
How
want.
about a heading?
Pardon me?
How about a heading?
Heading.
Access control.
Access control.
That is the key issue.
That's the key issue.
That is everything.
Okay?
Yeah.
Under that, you can put, the need for an ordinance to address private ramps, public ramps, unspecified ramps, dirt that people are driving into the lake on, all those sort of things can all come under access control because that's the only way to keep them out.
Okay, I'm a detail-oriented person, and I want to be specific. If you're going to be bringing it forward as a project and a proposal, it's good to just go ahead and disentangle it now.
Well,
So I'm sure it is there's a bigger umbrella for it, but I'm just saying if there's a way where we can list physical projects right now that either they're going to be integrated as one big thing, or they're going to have to go in different.
We can give you the list, we can probably solicit input from all the other participants here.
Okay.
And certainly, I would prefer to submit that list to the Watershed Protection District because that's the coordinator here.
That's great. I'm no longer in control of the list.
Well, I'm just saying, we're willing to do the work.
He will have it, yep.
So, let me make sure I call this,
Yeah.
so we're clear who's doing what.
Sure.
So it sounds like we're beginning to form out, and I use this term loosely for a moment, kind of a team or a subcommittee, if you will, whatever an action item group to start vetting the details of putting some form around what this potential application might look like that would qualify for the funding that we're talking about here for 2015. And it sounds like some of the action steps are doing what you're saying, Betsy, and Kristen, you're saying, which is it sounds like this is a starting point under 4, but what I'm hearing, if I'm hearing it right, that that's like the issue of the access issue overall is at a level of detail that isn't captured on this list right here.
No, but we can get that in.
But yeah, but we can get it, and it may very well be contained under one of these headings, but it doesn't physically exist, and that's okay. But we need to do what you're saying, which is collect these up on a piece of paper, if you will, and start saying, these look like the probable elements, along with developing boat cleaning stations, of what will be the various elements of this ultimate proposal to Westside, or it would be through Westside, correct? The 2015 money. And I have to ask this question. Ultimately, the application, you were saying Westside, the Watershed Protection District, which is you, Scott, would this application formally come through County DWR to Westside? Once everything was done, once the list was created and we vetted all this out and it actually was in some type of a written proposal format that ultimately was going to go straight over to Westside and be considered for funding based on that.
Well, it has to go through the coordinating committee,
Right. So,
of which the district is a member.
right. So that would be brought forward by you, Scott, correct? So, and I hate to be the sticky, but I'm thinking project management here in terms of somebody's got to own this thing over the next year
Right.
as all these pieces come together. So, sounds like it. Is it okay with you, Scott? I just want to call it out so we get it captured here.
Yeah.
And so the pieces are the list of the probable elements of the actual projects itself.
The implementable project.
Implementable, call it shovel-ready related projects.
Right.
Then there's the parameters we were talking about, learning what we can, and maybe that's where the state can come in to help a little bit in terms of what are those parameters that this application needs to fit nicely into to be justified.
In the interim, I definitely would use West Side IRWM plan because like what I said, the next IRWM funding could be focused on drought or maybe some other focuses as well. But the bigger umbrella is integrated regional water management plan. We've already had a plan for the region. So let's just use the West Side IRWM plan as a criteria. I believe like what you said, muscle invasive one is already in the plan.
The plan identified that as a very high priority for this implementation year, for which the coordinating committee created a task force specifically to address the regional Cuyahoga Buffalo activity. So
it fits very well with the
it's definitely part of the.
This is good because we've got a real, something to sink your teeth into over the coming couple of months to be able to put the meat on the bones on this, a formal application for funding that could go directly to Westside. That's important.
Where I live near Montana, and Mark will tell you, people around Salinas are in 3 months we might have a disaster. There are people who have to tank watering now, and the wells are going down, down, down. And Mark is deepening the well for his community service district, but there's people with private wells. Let's just hope there's water to manage in 3 months in Montana area.
It's going to get worse, no question.
Well, that's what I want to talk about here. It's listed as a lower priority project, but my concern is I really believe that it's time to update the Lake County groundwater management plan. Because
What are you on there?
I'm on page 5.
Well, I'll tell you what, if you can bear with me for 1 second, we haven't had a break in a while. This is a good transition point, because then we can take up this new topic right after the break, this your topic.
Because I really like to talk about this.
Great, so we'll open up with yours right after. Let's take 10 minutes, and then we'll come back to this. And then we'll make sure we capture this as an action item for the little subcommittee after today.
For protecting the source water and the lake, and that would be the owner of it, and that would be, because the lake is a public trust, it's owned by the State Lands Commission, and their bank account makes water resources look like chump change. They need to be involved in this because that's their resource. It belongs to the people of the state of California.
Well, and by 1973 legislation, the authority and responsibility for preventing pollution of the lake was delegated to the County of Lake in the state lands grant. So they have a direct relationship to whether this is done or not.
So State Lands Commission will be brought into the orbit
That
of
would be really good.
discussions here. Whatever form specifically that takes you to work.
Voting in waterways.
Bring your check.
Ideally. Okay. And the other piece I wanted to say is, just so we don't lose the action steps on this one, because this was a very good discussion about a real solid project that needs to start coming together. Ultimately, this has to go through you, Scott. It'd be appropriate to ask you to at least be point person on this project taking shape over the coming months, which could involve several people in the room here, but it's primarily, and if you're not, definitely push back, but I'm just want to leave the room with, some clarity as to how some next steps are going to occur. And we're talking about, and this may need some help coming from other folks around the room here. We talked about the state assisting with some of the requirements of what this grant might look like in terms of specifics. We talked about needing some other stakeholders in the room, possibly at the next meeting, the water purveyors and or others who need to be part of an application dialogue to make sure there's the support that needs to come together for this. And then the actual list of the pieces, and Betsy, you mentioned helping with some of that in terms of bringing some of that information onto a piece of paper, so to speak, so we can build on what was here and start actually having the actual components of what a project would be. So I just wanted to make sure we didn't lose that. Is that okay? So now we're going to move to, Jerry has the floor to talk about groundwater.
Okay. It's a concern to me that it's marked here its status as a lower priority.
And you're on what page, Jerry?
Pardon?
What page?
I'm on page 5, and this is goal 2. And my concern is that it's been, the status has been stated here as a lower priority project to update the Lake County Groundwater Management Plan, because that's our plan B. If the lake fails, plan B is groundwater. And at this moment, our groundwater is being rapidly resourced out to the vineyards and other agriculture, very small other agriculture, but there's also a lot more land that's been permitted to have mines put on it. So my concern is they're just knocking holes in the ground and pumping out the water. And I think that project should be one of our priorities to update the Lake County Groundwater Management Plan, because that's a very precious resource and we don't even have a current study. So I don't think that should be a low priority. I think that should be right up, it's water. And it's our plan B if the lake fails.
Thoughts on that one?
It could be part of a bigger grant.
Oh, I see. Would this be potentially part of
A separate grant.
the grant, or would it be
A
separate?
separate grant?
And there's
So
already.
it doesn't have anything to do with the invasive species in the lake.
No,
It's groundwater.
it's groundwater, and we already have residents here in the county that their wells are going dry. They've never had dry wells, and these properties have been owned in their family for 100 years. So that is a problem that we are facing. And so I think we really need to update our Lake County Groundwater Management Plan. I think that's a priority.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute. Is it that, and I'm just going to ask this, is it that it's the planning process that is viewed as not as a priority, but some components within needing to work on the specifics of the groundwater management process for the lake is a high priority? Is it the way it's worded, or is it actually the statement that the actual plan needs to be updated? Because it says that we talked about it on June 4th. I have to confess, I don't really remember that discussion very well. So.
I do.
It's very brief. I
Go
brought
ahead.
it up there.
Yes, the issue is that, as we discussed on June 4th, we monitor, the Department of Water Resources is a state designated monitoring entity, and as such has the authority for doing the monitoring of those 82 wells that they monitor twice a year. They submit that data to the Northern California IRWM region, to Mr. Ehorn. But that does not translate into management, because the authority that is granting the permission to get that water for whatever purpose is not the Department of Water Resources, it's the Community Development Department. So the permitting process does not have, in other words, there's no safe yield minimum that's been defined so that the permitting process doesn't exceed that safe yield worst case scenario, drought driven, volume of safe yield for fire suppression, health, and safety. So it's a management issue that is not within the scope of work of the existing Department of Water Resources task set.
Okay.
I did forget that.
Just
We'll go there, then we'll come back.
Just a quick clarification on the notes from last time. I had written in that it's not considered high priority, so I probably wrote it as a lower priority, not meaning that necessarily, Jerry. So
Sure.
I should probably change that to just say it's not the highest priority, unless now you're saying it is.
Well, I think it is a high priority. We're in drought, and we're accessing groundwater regularly, we're permitting it, and we have residents that their wells are going dry right now. That's a health and safety factor. I think it's a priority, and I think we need to look at it like a priority, not a low priority. I mean, if you were sitting on your property right now that your family had owned for 100 years, and you're having to truck your water in all of a sudden, it would become a high priority. And that's what's happening to many residents here in this county.
Yeah.
It is a high priority.
There's an additional factor here, and that is that because the water quality in the surface water supply, which is a critical water supply for several disadvantaged communities, has this imminent potential for becoming toxic with cyanobacterial toxins, and we are seeing the progression of that imminence potential. The backup system is our groundwater supply, but there is no identification, again, of what's available, and our natural hazards mitigation plan does call for mitigating the natural hazard called cyanobacteria in your surface water supply, but there's no definition of what you're going to do that. So understanding groundwater capacity, understanding how it's distributed, and understanding what needs to be there, which we have not yet defined, is a task that could be done under the rubric of updating the groundwater management plan.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Updating the plan. Go ahead.
It was my understanding that we're talking about a big grant that's called the Integrated Water Management Plan. And if we call it something like that, then the invasive species can be part of it, and so can the groundwater management be part of it. I want to finish, please. And the other thing is on page 3 when it says, include Clear Lake Integrated EML control program. In other words, coordinate a comprehensive Clear Lake watershed monitoring program. I would like to include the statistics of the microcystin testing by the California Department of Public Health Drinking Water Regulation. Because they've done microcystin testing already. And they have statistics about it that I have here from 211, and that we're going to get the statistics from 213.
Is that just an informational piece?
Yes,
for this?
it's just that we need to coordinate with this group because they've already tested the microcystins in the lake. Microcystins are toxins from cyanobacteria.
Maybe that's some informational data we could add to the chart.
Yeah, add it to that section, I would like to.
Do you mind sending that over? Kristen's kind of, I don't know if you were staying or not, the manager of this group, this document, but at some point, whether it's electronic or looks like it's not electronic, being able to put that information in?
Yeah, and I think invasive species can be part of an integrated water management plan, but not the thing.
Well, we were talking about the groundwater, to come back to the groundwater management plan for just a second, in terms of, so I'm hearing a couple things. I'm hearing that we're going to do a slight reword of, and actually, Joan, I'm going to ask you, is it Joan? Joan, actually, can I have you do that after the meeting or a break so we can continue along here? Thank you. So it sounds like we're going to change the wording slightly in here, as Kristen referenced, rather than lower priority. It's just not the highest priority. But I guess the next question is, based on the criteria that we've been talking about here, Jerry, do we have the genesis of a potential project that we can start putting our arms around, based on, you have a lot of passion behind the issue of drought, which, and we're losing a lot of water, and that certainly is germane in a lot of ways to a lot of the activities we're talking about here. It seems like it does hit a lot of these criteria that we were talking about, but let's flesh that out a little bit more here, what that might look like. Like what specific, when we talk about updating the plan, my worry is that, is there a funding source for updating the plan, whereas there might be funding for specific projects that are identified, but you're not just calling it updating the plan. Kristen?
Last time we discussed creating a sustainable yield study. I mean, I think that.
Yeah, that's
is on
what we're
point,
talking
is what
about.
she's saying, is that's what the project needs to be.
And
Sustainable yield study?
Yes.
I'd like to suggest that doing a standard vulnerability assessment is a project, and the vulnerability assessment then could result in the specification of, identified tasks.
Betsy, could you please clarify or maybe add a little bit detail of the vulnerability study?
It's a standard that the public health department has. I can send you the documentation on vulnerability
I'm familiar
assessment.
with that, DPH, Department of Public Health. I know for DWR, we just recently issued our cash gen kind of
Right.
statewide elevation monitoring
Correct.
basin map. We have identified high, medium, low priority, but that only based on the, well, I shouldn't say only, it has a lot of factors and the elevation data, population growth, and then they come up with a factor. Chris, I don't know if you remember, my impression or recollection is this basin is medium priority for this area, is that?
I think it's low.
Low, okay.
Well, it's low
Well,
because you don't
Scotts Valley
use
and
our
Big
route.
Valley are medium. I looked at your maps Friday, and they're over there.
Thanks. Yeah, so we do have that evaluation.
Sure.
So, groundwater issue is really complicated. I think even for us, and we're assisting a lot of the local agencies for just a sustainability yield study, it takes a long time.
Sure.
So I think we probably want to put that in a achievable scope, narrow that scope a little bit, focus on what we really need here.
Well,
Scott, do we have a groundwater management plan here?
Yeah, we
So
do.
we do have a plan, maybe just to start from that plan to see what's.
Once
data.
again, the plan is passive. It says the Department of Water Resources will monitor.
So in fact, on that note, I
That's
just
not
changed
a-
this wording.
that's
I
not
mean, I think
protective.
where we're getting tripped up is the word plan.
Right.
And it's like groundwater management implementation is really what we're talking about.
Correct.
Right? It's more project-specific issues. And so what might those look like? I'm hearing what you just said, was that sustainability yield study, vulnerability assessment is there, but is that too broad, or is there something else that needs to be added to that?
I just wanted a quick point of clarification. As part of CASGEM, with the county being the monitoring entity, you have to submit the county data, correct? Okay, so, I mean, that is a good place to start, using CASGEM and identifying all the data that's there, to then try to kind of step into a vulnerability assessment or a sustainable yield study.
How should I capture that? Is that use?
Well, I just think, thinking about the bigger picture of obtaining all the data and information that's already out there, and then kind of assessing where you need
Gaps.
to go next.
Gaps and needed next steps?
Can I ask how current is the data?
Oh, it's very current.
DWR's data, it's, yeah, we're based on decades of monitoring. If we see a groundwater basin have a sharp decline, and based on project population projection, all those different criteria, we would rate that basin differently.
Jerry, within the last 2 years, the Geological Survey came and monitored some of our wells in Kelseyville for the CASGEM report.
I have no idea how to spell CASGEM, but there it is.
CASGEM.
That's
Yeah,
it.
that is a correct one.
There's another monitoring entity that can contribute information to the study, and that's the Land and Water Use Division of the Northern California IRWM, Tito Cervantes.
Yeah.
That is a different report. He goes and he physically looks at every irrigated land operation, calculates the estimated water use based upon the crop type, and then they produce that report, and that's available as well.
That's part of the California Water Plan, and
Right.
Volume 5 is references for every county, all those data are there. But keep in mind, that's just for the development water supply. So they survey the land use, and then they will do a balance to see whether development water supply, whether it's balanced with whatever's agricultural uses. They also do projection. So, yeah, our group does that as well. But
And we need to connect both of those sources of information to our permitting process.
which
Land use here, permitted land uses, do not recognize their impact on source availability. That's what this goal is, ensure that water supply is safe, distributed adequately, and stored appropriately.
Betsy, that's
Yeah.
very important, I agree
Sure.
with you. This is our struggle because
I
again,
know.
historically,
I know.
water resources, land use is two separate.
Exactly, well, that's where we need to integrate, that's what I'm trying to say.
So I'm trying to capture, this is a good dialogue, I'm trying to capture this into what would be this implementation step, and this is kind of like, you know, number one, it sounds like, instead of, it's like do a sustainability yield study vulnerability assessment, I hear use the examine the CASGEM and analyze it to understand gaps or other data needs, correct? And then I heard a discussion on the state water resources data.
No, that's California Water Plan, that's DWR's plan. Every 5 years we update that. 2013, which is the latest, will be available sometime in the summer.
So again, I'm trying to formulate this into an action statement. It sounds like to do this vulnerability assessment, it's take the CASGEM data, take the current California Water Plan data analysis, correct? And it's use that in an examination here, correct, in
For
Lake
safe yield.
County for, what did you say?
Safe yield.
For safe
Safe
yield.
yield is
Safe
what we
yield
have to
study.
do.
So in other words, the outcome is use these data sources to understand gaps and needs and ultimately come up with a safe yield.
And then we need
study.
a policy that determines that the planning departments cannot
We heard a lot about that in
issue a
past
permit
meetings.
without reference to whether there's an adequate water supply.
Right.
Isn't that part of the CEQA analysis?
Except that we're under the population level for SB 210 and 610 and 220. That's for the mandated urban water management. We're
But on
under
a-
the population
On a
threshold.
project,
It is a criteria in CEQA though, Betty.
Oh, sure.
Betsy.
Sure,
It
it's
is.
a criteria in CEQA. Do you want me to actually air the dirty laundry here?
on a project specific for agriculture.
I can do
Okay,
that.
I'm a land use planner with the city of Lakeport. I'm just curious on a project specific basis, a large vineyard or something like that. When an initial study is done, don't they take into account, there's water supply related questions in conjunction with it?
There are water supply questions, but
And are they relying on this type of data to answer those questions?
can I answer that question,
Please do.
please?
Yes, and then Mike.
The Department of Water Resources, responsible for that initial study component, does not have this study on which to comment on an initial study on the impact to the supply.
So it sounds like we don't have all the data, then.
They have the data, they don't have the direction.
Mike, go ahead and then we'll come back.
Agriculture is exempt
From,
CEQA.
From CEQA. Well, water supply
Water
as
supply.
as a CEQA element of the initial study, ag does not have to prove
Doesn't
it.
have to prove, they don't
That's
have to
gotta
prove
change.
water.
That has to
Absolutely, that's a permitting
state level.
issue.
Well, no, CEQA is a state law.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
But all
how,
the local jurisdictions can
That's
adopt
right.
their own
but we have
CEQA checklist.
that's
Right
right.
to farm ordinance.
so let me ask the question about,
We can do a lot of things that we haven't done.
let me ask the question about from our criteria. So this is, it sounds like we've assembled essentially what is a potential project or initiative here for the most part. So the question is the funding source. Where would this, does this have a potential funding source to be able to package this into like we just did with the last one?
FEMA,
For the mitigation plans?
for the fact that it could be a health and safety disaster. It's in the mitigation plan.
We have to do it. I agree.
Safe water supply.
California Health Department.
Yeah,
CDPH at the state level? So anyway,
yeah.
so it sounds like there's a potential maybe, but I think emergencies are my world. FEMA's gonna be a reach, honestly.
Of course it
to be
is.
able to get there, but CDPH may be closer.
Sure.
Is there any other that, because, you know,
Would
Jerry.
DWR have a potential?
DWR used to have a groundwater management plan funding that they would provide to help you update your groundwater management plan and to provide local groundwater assistance, which would cover a sustainable yield study.
Who's that now?
The Department of Water
DWR.
Resources,
State
California
DWR.
Department. But again, that funding has been expended and there will likely, I mean, this is the year of groundwater, as you guys know. It's never been talked about so much, it's never been focused on so much because people are recognizing it's the insurance policy for a lot of counties
Right.
within California.
Mhm.
So there is legislation that's currently being worked on, and there's 2 Senate bills that are probably going to be joined together that will likely bring forward more funding for groundwater studies. But at the moment, there isn't something specifically allocated to that. So I think, I mean, come the next, if the water bond gets on there and what funding is discussed for groundwater, I think there's a good chance that it could go through the state in the future. But as of right now, I don't know of anything from DWR that could fund it.
Well, it sounds like, is it fair to say that, and I completely agree with you, there's so much attention on groundwater right now, there practically a day doesn't go by in the paper that we don't hear about either subsidence or some other issue going on statewide regarding groundwater because of the drought. It sounds like there's potential multiple funding sources if it was a well-crafted specific project, which I think we're getting some good elements here. The water bond is being talked about if it's going to go forward again. There may be some other drought money coming forward, and this seems to be, I mean, yes, this is a groundwater issue, but it also has a direct relationship to drought. And so I think there's a couple of manifestations of potential funding sources that could come out of this. The reason I mention it, and I'll come back to you, Betsy, is that it sounds like this is number 2 project from the one we talked about earlier on invasive species that has, I think, a lot of legs to it that makes sense to begin scoping out the elements in detail of what this project might look like, because it sounds like better than likely that some form of applicable funding source can and will emerge over the next 6 months or 9 months, that if you had a project like this in the can, kind of ready to go, and it's been scoped, and this group has talked about it, and it's gotten some awareness, as soon as one of these issues breaks free, then you can move forward, whether it's on a water bond or to the west side or what have you. So that's it.
Well, yeah, I got 2 things I wanted to tell you, mention. First of all, when you talked about the California Water Plan, the resource management strategies that Jan was talking about, all the different categories of reasons why you would want to fund something, those are all from the California Water Plan. And they became the adopted guidelines for Proposition 84 dispersal, because Prop 84 was funded by a water bond. That's the link to IRWM, is from the California Water Plan. Those strategies, those criteria, that do you meet multiple integrated needs, that comes right out of that whole state mandate. The other thing is, even though FEMA is hard to reach, there's another impetus to connecting this to the Natural Hazards Mitigation Plan, because we do not have a safe yield limitation that guarantees fire suppression flows for permitting. Now, we may be able to get that into the new ordinances, for example, but at this point, we don't have that. So even in our initial study, we don't talk about fire flows, the distance to the fire station, the ISO rating, and all of those kinds of concerns that should be a portion of that safe yield analysis. You want to be sure you have those fire protection flows.
Well, and that's the sort of data that when this gets fleshed out in more detail, in terms of what the study needs to capture to be able to come up with that's so critical to planning issues as well as what needs to be done for the region.
But I'm talking about funding
Just to mention
source.
that.
Funding source. Funding source, fire, natural hazard, WUI, Community Wildfire Prevention Plan, implementation of new ordinances, those kinds of tools.
Yeah, keep the eyes open. Go
We
ahead.
should at least ask the major vineyards, to their PR firms, and they may have a foundation, they have grants, they have stuff. They may help with this, because one, it could get them some PR. 2, they keep saying they're not depleting the groundwater. It'd be a great opportunity for them to put their money where their mouth is, show us you're not depleting it. And really, I think it could bring the community together, because right now, there is a big war between agriculture and domestic water use. And this just might be the one thing, and I think they could afford it. But if we could just find that one PR person that we need to link up with that could reach the others.
Well, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of the business interests that we've had at past meetings here today. But yes, this has come up before, and I think yet again now that ideally this is a reach out as this project takes shape. And I think we are capturing it as a thing with the other ones. There's 2 key projects need to be fleshed out and some work put together on them over the course of the coming months. So they don't die, but they're ready in the can when the funding sources can be identified. And I think the vineyards and the plant and you mentioned
Farm Bureau.
Farm Bureau was with us in the past. They're here today. But yeah, I think they can be a asset as well. And when we talk about stakeholders, I mean, to be able to justify and show the type of communication and coordination that's needed to justify a project like this, they would be key. Yes, Jerry.
That can be included in part of the permitting process, that the vineyards have to provide us with these studies per annually. You know, if that's included in the permitting process, like a contract, permitting.
What I understand, I don't know.
It's not
now.
currently part of the zoning ordinance, but the county of Lake is in the process of revising its whole zoning ordinance. And that means this is an opportune time to get the zoning ordinances to align with the management of groundwater. That would be really helpful.
Good idea.
So I have 4 o'clock, and this has been really good. We've got 2 very specific projects, and for want of a better term, and I don't know if, Scott, I don't want to put you on the spot a second time like I did before, but I don't know if you are the right, this one doesn't have a direct pass through to West Side, but I'd like to be able to find an owner of this, so to speak, so it doesn't languish before the next meeting, so at least some discussion can take place in some of these parameters on this one. Suggestions on who that is, or how we can capture this in the notes as next steps. You might have that.
Say that again.
Trying to find, you know how the first project on invasive species, that one was there's a lot of action steps that everybody agreed to needed to be done and we're ready to start on. And that one, its direct funding source endpoint was to West Side ultimately. That's Watershed Protection District, that's Department of Water Resources. Scott's going to be point on that to make just to be kind of a name owner to it, so that the pieces that, as some of the elements that we talked about, the action steps that need to start taking shape, assembling the stakeholders, understanding what the parameters are, state's going to help. The different steps that needed to be done for that project to start getting some meat on the bones, so it's ready to go once the funding source can be really identified. Scott was the lead for that one because it was a direct pipeline through his office to the watershed, to West Side. It's not as clear on this one because we don't have a clear funding source. I mean, it may be an application via water bond, it may be some other, Betsy was mentioning FEMA, we don't know exactly the funding source. However, because groundwater is such a big deal, and it's very likely, because there's so much attention on it, that there's going to be other funding sources through, like we talked about specifically, the most applicable one is the new water bond. That's likely to come out over the next, in the fall, is that what we're talking about, potentially? And something like that could very well have wording in it that could capture this. So we still want to keep this moving, start putting meat on the bones, getting the pieces together. So when that funding source becomes clear, that this also, like the invasive species one, is essentially in the can and can be fine-tuned and then be directed at that funding source when it becomes clear, because a little homework's still going to have to be done on what that is for. So we don't necessarily have to find an owner for it today. We have it in the notes. We know it's part of this group's effort, so it'll come up in the next meeting. I just want to make sure that the pieces for this don't get lost, that we have it as a solid action step.
They're not getting lost. Guarantee you.
We could all, as we have time, do as much research as we can and bring back what we can find to the next meeting, so we have a little more information. But what funding would we need? What are we looking for? Or would it be a position? Would it be, what is exactly the solution?
Jen, maybe we could get together offline and I can show you a bunch of resources for that.
in a couple weeks.
Yeah.
I'm really buried for the
Oh,
next.
no, we're ending the fiscal year, we're all dying.
Okay.
Okay, I got 3 grant reports to put in too, so I understand, but we
So
could
we're talking about 2 different projects,
brainstorm.
correct?
Correct, talking 2 different projects.
One is the integrated water management project,
No, one is invasive species,
invasive species.
and this one is groundwater. These are the 2, at least today anyway, we've identified that they have some solid potential and steps that need to be done to get them ready to go so they're in the can when a funding source can be identified.
I
It's
understand the
unlikely.
federal government is going to make a groundwater management plan.
I think that's true. Those become pass-through monies usually to the state, DWR, and/or the county, but usually it's an application process.
Okay.
They will move up.
That doesn't prevent us from doing local work.
No.
And we know we have work in the mill from the zoning ordinances.
So I'm hearing a couple of folks, Betsy and
Sure.
Jan,
Yeah.
are going to, at the very least, talk offline about some of these parameters to start
Yeah,
putting
we can brainstorm on that.
some organization around what this project will look like. We look forward. Thank you for that. So with that, we don't have that long left, but this has been good. 2 solid projects taking shape. I think it's important to be ready for funding. That was one of the big focal points and goals of this effort, was to do that. So in our new agenda item here, we have kind of open mic for a few minutes in terms of any other ideas, thoughts, next steps, or agenda items for the next meeting. And then I'm going to hand it over to Scott to talk about the logistics and when and where and details for the next meeting, the next quarter. But we've got 2 solid projects taking shape here. So kind of open mic for a couple of minutes in terms of other items and issues. No? Okay, Scott, I guess you're up right away in terms of thoughts about closing out the meeting and next steps for the next quarterly meeting.
Okay. Well, I think first and foremost, we need to decide on the location and the time. And we've heard Mike's comments about that, and maybe as evidenced by the low turnout today, that it's difficult to get the public to engage on 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So I'm open for recommendations for a time and a place. Is it an evening meeting during the week? Is it a weekend meeting? So I'd entertain some suggestions.
I think evening, I think weekends, it's summertime, a lot of people are, children and everything, weekends can be pretty impactful. I think evenings for me would be better.
Okay.
I mean, day is fine for me, but we could try to see if it increases our attendance.
Also, Mr. McReynolds from the Northern California IRWM branch said that if we were to be able to provide teleconferencing capacity, he would love to be able to participate. So that would be beneficial. I know you got that done for the supervisors' chambers at the county courthouse, Scott. So we
Right.
have that ability to do teleconferencing from that chamber. I believe we also have that capacity here, don't we, Doug?
All right, so an evening meeting with teleconferencing, and Doug, is that available here, or, you know?
If you go on Channel 8 Live.
You can watch Channel 8 Live from here? Okay. All right.
That's true.
So, I guess the location then, is there an interest in alternating between Clear Lake and Lakeport
I think that'd be
Yeah.
great. That'd be fair.
on the quarterly meetings? So the next one would be in Lakeport in an evening, any particular,
Anything but a Thursday.
anything but a Thursday, okay? So we have City of Lakeport meetings,
City Council Tuesday nights. and
Tuesday nights.
Mr.
And
Brannigan.
planning commission Tuesday, Thursday nights.
Well, you're correct, Betsy. Planning Commission meetings are Wednesday night. However, Mr. Brannigan, who typically attends this forum, does not attend the Planning Commission meetings, so
Ah,
he's
good,
free.
okay. Oh, that's right, okay. You're here for him, I forgot.
All right, so those are, so Wednesday evening is looking promising, okay? As far as noticing that meeting, We got some stuff on a website. We have the flyers, which I appreciate you putting those flyers together. Follow that same strategy.
Be nice to have the flyers out of maybe a week
We need
or
to
so
personally-
before, because it was just really a scramble. I didn't get them to.
So get them out a couple
Thursday
weeks,
before
get them
the
a
day.
couple weeks.
Yeah, that'd be
time.
helpful.
And
It's
invite
just,
the wine alliance and the winery.
yeah, we can,
And Channel
Right.
8 can run notices also, Scott.
sure, we can do
Say
more
I got
outreach if we have a little
PSAs.
more time. And I wanted to mention, I don't know if you all know this, but there is a water group of the winery owners that's coupled up with Sonoma and Napa County. Are you familiar with it?
What's the name of it?
I can't remember what it's called, but it's an actual water association,
Vintage Waterworks.
something like that.
Yeah, I get their notices periodically. I haven't gotten any in a while though.
No, they have never responded. I contacted them when before that Quagga-Muscle class that was held at the Canocti Casino a couple of years ago from UC Davis. But that is an association. Why don't I try to get in touch with all those water associations that we can.
Private water companies.
I have that written down. Okay, anything else?
Could we use Amy Little to help get through to those water purveyors?
I have a list of the companies right here.
I
We might
understand,
be
but
able
they
to
don't
get Amy to
respond
help us.
well to private people. Could we, they love Amy, so could she
Or
maybe
Michelle
help us?
or Sherry, I can
Yeah.
get them to help us.
Exactly. That would be really super, because they do have that connection.
And so when will, in 3 months, there's gonna be a meeting?
Yeah, next, in 3 months.
So that's September? Or August?
I'm gonna pull out a calendar.
Some of them have shown up at these meetings in the past when they were in Lakeport. It's not so.
So it's end of June, it would be July, August, September.
You know, I would like to mention that in September, September 3rd, I believe, is the schedule for the County of Lake to adopt its final budget. And on July 1st, coming up at 6 o'clock, if they approve it tomorrow on the Board of Supervisors, on July 1st, they're planning on having an evening meeting to discuss the actual County of Lake budget. And one of the things that's not clearly given enough support is the Watershed Protection District. So, you know, a lot of things can develop that will help support what Scott needs to do to get this done.
So yeah, Scott, I guess you're talking September?
August or September.
August or September. I mean, September is school, starts out and start losing some people in the region, but, so I guess the question is, end of August, is that better, or do people want it in early in September?
He's right, though. Labor Day weekend, boy, everybody's gone. Kids are back in school. They're busy.
August 27th is a Wednesday evening.
Sounds good. That sounds good.
Lakeport,
Yes,
what time?
6 o'clock. Yes.
Where?
Board of Supervisors.
Board of Supervisors Chambers.